Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the meeting of the Independent Science Board. First thing on the agenda is we'll go around and have the Science Board members introduce themselves and state whether or not there's any new conflicts of interest or any conflicts of interest. And I'll start with Joy. Yes, and don't forget to turn your mics on and speak into them because we have people on the phone.
Bring the microphones all real close to yourselves, so don't be bad. Give me your best help.
Now what do I do?
Yeah, it's on now. Red is on.
Oh, it is on, okay. Joy Zedler, no changes, no skill at operating the microphone.
Okay, Dick.
I'm going this way. Richard Norgard, no changes.
Steve Brandt, no changes.
Tracy Collier, no changes.
Jay Lund, no changes.
Tom Hulser, I don't have any conflict yet.
Joe Fernando, no changes.
Okay, and on the phone, Vince.
No changes. Vince Resch.
John, are you there?
Yep. John Waynes, no changes.
And Liz, are you there?
Yes. Liz Canuel, no new conflicts.
Okay. Okay, I guess the next item is my report, and I did make a presentation to the Delta Council on February 22nd, giving them our updated status of what we've been up to, and also principally focusing on what our intent is over the next year. And in your packet, I think there's one of the slides from that, which is sort of a blue diagram that shows where we are and what our responsibilities are over the next year. And you can see that the 2018 is pretty booked, and 2019, it'll look something like this blue thing here, is fairly well booked as well. And I think I also talked a little bit during that presentation about ecosystem forecasting in general. I think most of you probably have copies of that. Most of the board members would have copies of that presentation. The kind of questions, I got one question from one of the council members asking about whether anyone has ever really disagreed with our reviews and our recommendations. And of course I said, no, everything is perfectly well accepted all the time. And, but I did point out that in particular, the water quality review, our latest review, that there was a lot of very good comments. We received a number of comments from the public review of that document, and it's currently under revision, so we do get those kind of things. But in general, we have which we value, and then we change our reports if we deem it's necessary. And that, but in general, we normally receive very good compliments about the kind of things that we do. There was some discussion also about a lot of interest, I guess, in the monitoring review we're undergoing, and particular questions about if we'll be dealing with how where the monitoring data goes, and is management making use of that information. There's one thing. Is there anything else, Edmund, I'm looking at that came out?
I think you got the key ones.
Okay. So that's really all I had to say about that. I think we will, I'm looking at Jessica, be asked to come back again and talk more in detail, I think, about the monitoring. Was that what I heard you promised for us?
Yes, quarterly. I think right now you're scheduled to do quarterly updates at the council meetings.
Okay, any questions on that? Yeah. Oh, Dick, sorry.
Yeah, there was one suggestion that maybe we should at least be a lead for a review of SFEWS of the journal.
Yeah, I'll get to that. That was part of the
okay.
IEP thing. The second item that is on my thing is to mention that the DWR did not formally respond back to the Delta ISB for the review of the water fix, but their response is posted on the BDC website. Anything more I need to say about that, Edmund? Okay. And then I guess the next item is just to review the agenda. It's agenda today. For the primary topic on the agenda is to look at the water quality review itself and talk about that, and then talk about some of the various other reviews. We'll give a report on what happened at the IEP meeting, which is later on in the agenda, and then, like I said, give brief updates. So I think I did want to say that our new student fellow, Katarina Peen, is starting on Monday. That's why she's not here today, I guess. So she's clearly got some smarts to her. So any questions or public comment on that? So I'll turn it over to Tracy and Liz to give us an update on the water quality review.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, Tracy, Liz, and Vince. You guys are backing me up. So we last time we talked about the public comments received. We distributed those to people. The three of us have been going back and forth fairly vigorously responding to the public comments. And you now have a draft that deals with, we think, the public comments in a reasonable and balanced way, fair and balanced. And you've only had it for 2 days, so I don't expect that you've necessarily had a chance to look at all of the changes and how it responds to the public comments. There's also a few things, so I think what we should do first is talk about any comments from the board in general on the version you have now. And again, if you haven't had time to read it, we'll deal with that later. And then there also are a few other comments, primarily from Steve. We have other board members who've given us some comments. Steve has some questions about whether we're verging too much into policy in some of the areas, and I think we'll discuss that after. But first, I'd like to just open it up for board members to see if there are any thoughts on the version you have now. And then Vince and Liz, at any time, jump in. So Vince and Liz, you can't see, but I'm waiting to see if anybody raises their little sign or turns on their microphone. I think they're all starting to read the document right now.
So Tracy, this is Liz. I was wondering, would it be good to just give a few bullets of, sort of the high level changes that we made, or I don't know.
Yeah, in my view, that would be, I mean, we've distributed to board members. Edmund did a really nice job of taking the previous version and then doing a comparison in Word so that you can just go through and see where the changes were. I think it would be, number one, tedious. I could start going through the document, but I think it would be better for board members to look at that change rather than us trying to highlight. But if you have an idea of the main things that you think we should highlight as changes to the board, feel free. I don't have that. To me, I just look through the whole document. But if you want to give a few bullets, you or Vince, please feel free to do that. Going once?
I'm
Go ahead.
okay with leaving it scope to the board to look at the track changes version and the new final version.
Right, that's what I'm suggesting.
I guess I would ask if there are, in your view, is there any of the either findings or recommendations that were substantially enough changed that you think it's worth a board discussion about, or is it largely just finesse?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think I would say there's two things that I think that we were probably being a little too, I don't know what in our remarks, but too something, according to the public comments. One of those was on the stating the perception that if there are projects that may result in things like a more northerly diversion, this could lead to a reduced support for monitoring and protection of water quality in the Delta. And we got a lot of pushback on that, and there were things that honestly we were not aware of on the part of some agencies and the commitments, the legal commitments they had to maintain that water quality. So we have left in that there is still a perception that that could happen, but we have not, we have significantly reduced our emphasis on that. The other thing was when we were talking about chemical contaminants that are likely causing some adverse effects currently in the Delta. We had focused on pesticides, but we broadened that to include also mercury and selenium because there's a lot of evidence for that. So we broadened that finding to a wider class of chemicals that we believe there is sufficient evidence to say there are currently effects occurring. Anything else, Vince or Liz, that you would think were major changes in the findings and recommendations?
I think that's the big, yeah.
Go ahead, Vince.
No, I think that's the big one that you just covered.
Okay. Edmund?
I think one of the major things when I got out of reading the comment letters is to your first main finding on page 3. It is not clear to us or many of the agency personnel and stakeholders that we discussed this issue with how water quality data are being used in management decisions and whether data are being collected are sufficient to support optimal management decisions. Just when I was reading the draft, I didn't quite see that. Cause I think there are ways how this data are being used, but I think maybe you guys are more focused on like the ecosystem health portion of it. Is that an accurate assessment? Cause I feel like some of the comment letters, like maybe you just didn't talk to the right people of how data are being used. But I think one of the questionnaire responses was focused more on like the overall ecosystem health, like maybe restoration projects aren't considering water quality when they're incorporating their design. I'm just wondering if there's a better way to still phrase this. That's just like one of my overall thoughts.
That's a good point, Edmund. And Liz, do you have anything to say to that? I'll first just say that, yeah, we felt that there are many places where people are not aware of some of the data being collected and some of the data are not being used. So it's not, if it comes across that we're saying no data are being used, none of the data being collected or used, we don't want to give that impression. But there definitely is a sense, and this is based largely on our interviews with people and are looking at where data, water quality data are being collected. There are numerous cases where water quality data are being collected and do not appear to be very well used, and one of those is in some of the restoration projects. Liz, Vince, what would you want to add on to that?
This is Vince. Well, you know, I think that one of the things is the people that did make very strong comments were the ones that were at the extremes that are using it, and they're speaking for themselves more than for the whole community, because certainly we see that a lot of people are very concerned that this is not being used. A lot of our other people we interviewed.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that I think some of the ways that the data are perhaps best used are in meeting compliance and regulatory issues. And so Edmund brings up a good point about, you know, maybe directing that comment more specifically toward ecosystem health. But Vince is also correct in that, broadly speaking, I think a lot of people that we spoke with and received responses from didn't feel like the data were used very widely. So maybe there's still an option to finesse that main point a bit more.
Yeah, I agree with that. Jay?
I don't recall the people that were interviewed and surveyed so much. My guess would be that the people that want water quality data for downstream treatment plant operations and things like that would pay a lot of attention to it. And certainly the water quality, drinking water regulators, as Liz mentioned, probably pay very close attention to a lot of these kind of data. But my impression is on the ecosystem side that it's not being as widely used as it might be.
Joy?
Would it
Joy.
help to slightly reword the first point to say that it is clear, blah, 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 but not clear, and then make your point? Because what you said does sound a little different from what's on the page here, and I thought what you said was really good.
Luckily, we were recording it, so we can. So what I'm hearing is I think we should make it clear in this first main finding that, water quality data are definitely being used, especially in managing, specific water quality decision-making for some of the purposes that Jay just enumerated. But when it comes to ecosystem health, water quality data, there's a strong perception that water quality data are not. So I've taken notes on that, and that's something we'll.
There might be another area of the wastewater dischargers, might also be paying more attention to these data, but probably not as much as the drinking water folks.
Right. Anything else from board members or Edmund, somebody who's read everything in great detail?
Did you have slides?
No. I have one slide, but we'll come to that at the end. That's a very minor thing. So I think what I am proposing is that we will give you guys I would say a week to look at the revised version together again with the public comments received. See if you think we have under or over reacted to any of the public comments. We will work on this again, give you another version. We will take, especially this main finding one, we have an input from you right now that we'll take care of. And then we'll go from there. So I think I'll move on to staying on the water quality, and we'll take public comment at the end. Steve had some points he raised that he felt that at two places in the list of the 10 findings and recommendations that our recommendations were verging on policy when we specifically said that a specific effort needed more resources. And he felt that, I'll let you, maybe I should let you speak to it, so.
Yeah, the versions now at least look a lot less policy-oriented. The original versions I know I had a lot of comments on a number of the recommendations that related to policy, and so I guess it's softened a little bit in two of those, but I guess the question would be is that something we think we should be recommending more resources? Because it may be that here's the problem, you need to solve it, we need more research emphasis in this area, and there's a lot of ways to solve that other than more resources. And so I'm just wondering if that is outside our purview. It's just open for discussion.
Yeah, and I'll just open that to the board for discussion. My feeling is that if as we go through these reviews, if we see something in the current structure, we're certainly going to be looking at governance on IEP. That's part of our main charge. If we see something that we think could, and maybe we don't say money, I think we just said resources. It's just our recommendation as how to address one of these issues that comes up. So I personally don't have a big issue with it, but certainly it's up to the board. Dick?
If we can solve it by multiple ways, then we should lay out the multiple ways that can be solved. I agree that we shouldn't be recommending a particular policy, but if we can lay out the various policies, that's not being policy specific.
I'm usually pretty unshy about policy stuff, but I think it's not good for us to advocate a particular policy, but it's often useful for us to advocate consideration of a particular policy. I think that's an important distinction to be made.
So let me just use a specific example that I think is the most, two examples. Recommendations. The Delta Regional Monitoring Program needs more resources in order to expand the contaminants it monitors, along with expanding the temporal and spatial coverage. And then the California Water Quality and Monitoring Council needs additional resources and authority to be more effective. And then we say there are other agencies that could also assist in that.
I think for example, on the first one, it would be within our purview to say, there's a need to monitor additional contaminants if you want to have better coverage on water quality. If agencies want to have that objective, they're going to need to invest some more resources or some reorganization to achieve that.
Okay.
So I think those are kind of ways where we can sort of lay out a path or branches and paths.
So we'll take that under advisement, Vince and Liz, but also Jay or others. If you have suggested wording on that, as we always do when you bring something up, please send us your suggested wording. And again, on these recommendations, we're trying to keep them short enough that people don't have to read a paragraph to say, what do you want, what do you think we should do? So, but I'm certainly open to that, so.
This is John. I guess I've got a somewhat different perspective on that. It seems to me that if we do a review of the science and we find that the science is struggling because of a lack of resources, it's incumbent upon us to point that out. And I don't interpret that as getting into the specifics of policy. We're not talking about a specific policy for a line item in a budget or an allocation from a particular agency. We're just stating what is a fairly obvious thing, and I think it would be remiss of us not to draw those conclusions in our reviews.
Thanks, John. I think what I'm hearing is it's fine to call for additional resources. We've done that in many of our previous reviews. The question is, should we identify a specific entity to which those resources should go? And that's where I'm hearing that possibly not, other than to the ISB. Okay, any other thoughts from the board? I wanted to go over one more thing on this, which is Brian Atwater in his parting salvos to us said, "I can't believe you don't have graphics in here." And I said, "Well, look at Appendix B. It's got all these great graphics. It's got data and bar charts." But we have been wondering about that. We have two things we've thought about. One, I'm going to put up on the screen right now. If you guys could put up the slide. We thought either as part of the cover of this, or more likely, I think Liz had a good idea. Liz has put these together. This is it's slide number 11, if you can go to. The printout right here. Yeah, this one. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. So that's the one that, that's what we call a word cloud. Liz put these together of the words that appear in the document itself as well as in the responses. It's up on the screen. You can all see it there. Basically, how often these words are used in responses from people we interviewed or responses from the questionnaire we sent out, as well as what's in the document, as a way to show what are the main things that are coming up again and again in water quality. And here you can see it's obviously monitoring, management, data, and effects, along with a range of chemical constituents and nutrients. So we're thinking we could put this, one of our main findings is that there is not a common understanding of what constitutes water quality in the Delta. And this might be a good place to put that in. We could also put it in as a cover thing. And I'm just looking for feedback from people right now on that one. Come on, you've had 30 seconds to look at it. I mean,
I guess when I first read one of the original versions of the water quality report, I noticed that a number of the recommendations related to monitoring, and given that we're doing a monitoring review as well, and that's still the case if you look at a majority of those, and so and that's not a bad thing, and so I'm just wondering, this here, is that an assessment of what we did? Because it does reflect sort of the emphasis of the board's report, maybe, and I don't know how that reflects the emphasis of the real world, or.
well, we've done it a number of ways. We've done it just using the responses to the questionnaire, just using the report, and we felt that there was some differences in. Actually, the monitoring, and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the monitoring comes up probably as strongly or stronger in the responses. This is a way to just, and again, it's not quantitative, and it's, you're right, it's driven by how much, we discussed the fact that I write very little and Vince writes comparatively more, so it looks like his stuff is more important than mine. So I just use words repeatedly over and over. And again, this is just a visual of some of the, if we use it to illustrate the broad array of things that people are talking about when they're talking about water quality, even when we've explicitly already said we're not talking about salinity and dissolved oxygen and temperature, it's still a pretty complex picture of what water quality is. And again, this would speak to one of our recommendations, which is we really need to develop a both qualitative and quantitative models, conceptual models and quantitative models of water quality in the Delta, because we look through a number of things that have been done and we don't see that large-scale conceptual model that covers these attributes of water quality in the Delta. And then the other thing was Liz came across or had a really nice conceptual model of nutrients in the Delta. And Liz, we haven't talked about that. We've been too busy getting the rest of this put together, but I think we're still talking about putting that conceptual model of nutrients, which in my view is comparatively less complex than the array of chemical contaminants in the Delta, and trying to put that into one model. Joy. Then Joe, then Jay.
This is part one, and if I were picking this up, I would like to see a little footnote that says part two will be blah, blah, blah.
We do say somewhere in here
Yeah.
that part two will be covering these things.
But it would be nice right up front, so.
Oh, on the title page you're
Yeah,
talking
or
about,
right
okay.
inside the front cover, so that right away people will know, and approximately when that might be, if it's in days or in years.
It's going to be after I'm off the board.
Just to follow up, thanks.
Okay. Joe.
You have California, water, but the Delta is not there as a word here.
So when we first did this, Delta, water, quality were the three giant ones.
Mm-hmm.
And this review is on Delta. So we would make that clear. We eliminated Delta, water, and quality because the whole thing, yeah.
But water's there.
Yeah.
What is there?
Oh, yeah, why is water there, Liz? I'll blame her for that, but anyway, initially it was all Delta water quality and everything else filled in, so.
That was my comment.
Okay. So, are people okay with us proceeding along this word cloud with appropriate description of what went into it, talking about phase two, and how that's going to go, coming up with a revised draft for everybody to look at within hopefully a couple of weeks? Liz, how's your new job going? I hope you don't have to work too hard on it.
This is John. I think the word cloud is a great idea, and it really highlights the importance of perceptions of some of the key words. Makes me wish we had done that for the adaptive management report, too. I guess we could go back and do that, but I'm not sure what we'd do with it then. But I think it's a great idea, so I'd go ahead and put it on the cover.
Okay. So I think, any more board comments? Otherwise, we may have some public comments coming on this.
Just a question,
Okay.
is it the intent then to try and get it for an action item in April?
I would sure like to. I wanted to do it as an action item today, but Edmund said we have to put it on the agenda first, so. So I would like to. I think, Liz, Vince, what do you guys think? I don't want to put us on a spot. Do you think we can take what we've heard so far, and we still have public comment to come, and turn this around and say, it would be, what day is our April meeting?
April 3rd.
April 3rd, so we got basically 3 weeks, and we have to get it out a week ahead of time.
Well, we're asking for comments within a week, so I think we could certainly do it. We then have 2 weeks for a turnaround to get it posted for approval. I think we could do it.
And do Liz and I have to fly to Morocco to meet with you to get this done? Okay, so Steve, in answer to your question, and Liz hasn't objected, we will try to turn this around and have it ready, have it out a week ahead of time of the meeting to have it ready for an action item in April, hopefully. And if we run into a snag, we run into a snag. Edmund? Yeah.
So I just want to clarify, it'll be a content approval and not a format, because for your past reviews, will be formatted and everything like that. So
Right.
it's a content.
It'll be what I was hoping we might be able to do now is to do a basic content approval with some further minor modifications not needing further review by the board, and then formatting and official production by the DSP staff.
Yeah, that could be a 2 to 3 month process, just so you know.
Right.
Because that's done by our council's
Oh, yeah, council,
communication staff.
yeah, okay. And that's fine. But basically, we want to get it checked off as the content from the ISB's point of view is finished.
And I actually want to follow up with you on a few other follow-up items for the review, and I just want to see if you're still working on that. I think you're going to have like a next step implementation section. I didn't quite.
You didn't quite see that, did you? Yeah.
Yeah.
Liz, Vince, where are we on that?
Well, we've talked about it. We've got some ideas, but I think we could have that done by April.
Yay, Vince.
Yeah, we have some notes from some of our conversations, but I think right now, I guess we focused on the public comments and trying to include those before we added that section.
Right. So we will attempt to get that in there. What else?
So my other question too is, in terms of graphics, the two main ones would be your word cloud and then the nutrient conceptual model.
Possibly. We may or may not use the nutrient conceptual model.
Okay.
Again, it would be, if we did that, it would be really nice to have a chemical contaminants conceptual model, but I went through the existing conceptual models for a range of contaminants in the Delta, and they vary extremely widely in terms of their specificity and complexity.
I just had a few more ideas that maybe you guys can consider. I'm sorry, this is probably a public comment, but I think Joy had some questions about the Delta donut. It may be helpful to just have a visual or a map of the extent of that Delta donut.
Oh, the peripherally?
Yeah. And then the other thing too is I think for finding number 8 on page 5, it states, water quality monitoring is often not done at the frequencies commensurate with the variability of the contaminants. This is especially true at locations where flow is measured systematically. These measurements are not needed to provide information about loadings, but pretty much, like you mentioned that water quality collection isn't taken where the flow is collected. If it may be helpful, if you want more visuals, have a map of like, here are the flow stations, and here's where the water quality is being collected. So then you have a visual of, oh, it's not at the frequencies, or it's not at the scale of where it's being collected.
Darcy, we'd like to ask you for about 3 weeks of Edmund's time, if you don't mind.
You guys get 3 weeks of Edmund's
Okay.
time.
I meant the water quality, no other ISB business. Okay, I really like that idea, so. Vince, Liz, that sounds reasonable to you? I'm not, I want to do that. I don't want to just slap together some visuals and paste them in to get it done. So if it takes longer to do it well, then we'll just defer another month. What's another month in 6 years? Edmund.
So I think maybe a good target date is if we don't get it, if you don't feel it's ready to have a draft out by 10 days before the meeting, maybe we'll just hold off until May if that works with you. Just so board members have enough time to review too.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about that last visual that Edmund suggested, it would take a while to get that data and put it in a format that's pretty readable and understandable.
Thanks. Edmund, the money I promised you for asking us to delay an extra month will be on its way tomorrow, so thank you. Any other comments from the board? Jay.
This is a great effort. Glad to see it coming.
Thank you.
Coming to a conclusion.
Public comment.
You would like to come up here and say your next
I thought we'd have public comment. Laura, you didn't come here just to listen, did you? Tim came just to listen? Yeah, right. Yeah, they were, yeah. Okay. Hand it back to you, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy, and I agree with
Tracy, just one other thing. If we are going to do that last point that Edmund brought up, if it's going to be too difficult to get real data to do that, we could just do a hypothetical example of what that would show, which would be a lot easier.
You're talking about the flow stations versus water quality stations? That'd be just real sampling.
Right.
Well, that would just be real sampling points. It wouldn't have to be, we'll have to look and see what's available, and I'm pretty sure that should already be available or easily
But it's going to vary based on what are the constituents that are being examined. That's why I was thinking that it could end up being just multiple versions depending on the constituents. So, okay, that's just a point.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, that recommendation had two sort of components to it. So one was the spatial scale, but there was also a temporal aspect to try to capture more event sampling. And I know the USGS is doing some of that work, but I think that there were several comments about the importance of considering the flow regime as well as the concentration measurements.
Okay. So Steve, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Jay said. This is you guys have done a terrific job, and also a really solid sort of response to the public comments that you got. And this is a huge task. It looks like it's seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So.
No jokes about oncoming trains.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 4, the council report by Jessica Law.
Thank you. Good morning, board members. I'm happy to be here. I wanted to start out first with congratulations to Dr. Jay Lund on being invited to join and elected to join the National Academy of Engineering. That's a huge distinction. And we're thrilled that the work that you do here in the system is being recognized at that national level. So congratulations. Good. So there's a few upcoming council meetings that I wanted to discuss, and then also the upcoming DPIC meeting in April. So the next two council meetings, March 22nd and April 26th and 27th, will be focusing on the programmatic EIR, on Delta Levy investment strategy, conveyance, storage, and operations, and performance measures. And actually, the main focus of that will be at the April meeting, where we are going to be asking the Council to consider the environmental document for adoption. But in March, we will have a kickoff discussion, or actually a follow-up discussion on the Delta Levy investment strategy, and an update from the Department of Water Resources and our staff on how implementation of that is going so far. So there's sort of 3 main things that they've been working on. The members of that working group will come and give the council members an update. So that might be something of interest to you. The April 26th, that's the date for the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee meeting. So as you know, we do this twice a year. I'm very happy to announce that I'm no longer the coordinator for that group. So we have Amanda Bowl, who has been working for the council for the past few years. She has taken over that position as Special Assistant for Planning and Science, so she's now coordinating the DPIC meetings. And she was at the IEP workshop this week, and I'm sure that you will be seeing more of her over the next coming months when she's done with planning for this meeting. But that meeting, as you know, often focuses on restoration, so sort of ecosystem status, and then also One Delta, One Science. And so this meeting will continue that trend. They'll talk first a bit about the California Water Action Plan. So if you remember, that was released probably about 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, and has been a really important document for this administration and many of the state agencies to help focus their efforts on activities in the Delta and really statewide. So we'll give an update. We'll ask the committee members to give an update on progress on that. And then we'll also talk about the future Delta, 2015 to 2100. So identifying desired future and vision for restoration and recovery. This is really going to tee off of a recent blog from the California Water blog. So we've invited Jeff Mount to come and speak at the DPIC meeting. And we can talk about that blog a little bit more too. There's a lot of really interesting ideas in there. But his presentation will focus on part 1 and part 2 of that blog if you haven't seen it. And then also we'll talk a bit more about just ecosystem recovery in a broader context. So the progress on the Eco-Restore projects, and then also our own ecosystem amendment, and I'll be giving an update on that later today. But really, it's an opportunity for the committee members to talk about their vision from their own agency's perspective, and then how we continue to make progress on these efforts. And then lastly, we'll be talking about One Delta, One Science, and how do we get there, and what does that vision look like? So this is really going to tie in the discussion with the Delta Science Plan, and I won't steal Yumi's thunder on that. She's going to be presenting later today on progress on that plan. But I think really we're seeing all of these conversations starting to tie together in much more of a rich way. The blog that came out recently, if you have seen it or haven't seen it, it proposes a JPA for science. I think it's coming out at a good time. At the council meetings, we've been having a lot more conversations recently about how we get from data to decisions. We heard about that a lot at the IEP workshop this week. I think the phrase was from the boat to the boardroom, also a good way of describing the conundrum and the challenges of really getting from data analysis and collection to policy and decision making. So at the council meetings, we've committed over the summer to do more of a focus series on just that data to decisions. It'll tie in quite well with work on the science plan. With this recent proposal of a JP, I think we might spend a little bit more time focusing on science governance overall and funding structures, and pulling in a lot of the work that we had at the Science Enterprise Workshop in 2016, where we were looking at other examples, both at national level, and I think there's some really good examples around the state, where there's there's other people have solved the governance issue in different ways. So overall, that's where we're headed at the council. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions for anyone? Okay, thanks, Jessica.
Thanks.
Can I have our next panelist come up for the next item? Yumi and Gabriel. For item number 5, we have 3 requests coming down the pike from the council and the program on upcoming reviews that they're asking the board to do. And so we've asked the panelists to give us some idea of what they're specifically asking us to do and what the background is on the document, maybe the length of the document if known, and sort of anything they know about a timeline for us. I wanted to let the board know that we've been discussing doing an initial, what we're calling a red flag review. We'd have a small group, a couple of individuals, take a document and give a red flag review, which would more or less not to see if there's something major that should be added or shouldn't be added to the document, just sort of an initial review so our input could have some value as the rest of the documents being prepared. And then we would do our formal review once we have a more comprehensive document that is sort of at the public stage. So we're going to go through these one at a time, and then one of the things we want to discuss as a board is whether this red flag review is an appropriate process for us. And then we'll need to talk about, other than asking questions, eventually get sort of our work group assigned to each one of these documents to get the initial steps taken on that. Whether we can do that now or whether we wait until we actually see some of the documents, that's for open discussion. So I guess we can start with Jessica on the Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment.
Sure. So I think I've mentioned this at the past few meetings, and I can provide an update. I believe John has been talking a little bit with the subcommittee members about them too. But so really where we are, we've been focused mostly on the synthesis papers lately, and that's really the first step. So the synthesis papers and technical analysis is really the first step for this whole process. We're really focusing on that process initially to give us a a good solid base before we start getting into policies, recommendations, and performance measures. We've also been doing a tremendous amount of outreach, both listening sessions individually with stakeholders, and then last month we had a public workshop after the council meeting. So there's a presentation at the February council meeting and then a workshop afterwards. And I think the synthesis papers themselves, I'm really excited for the ISB to be able to look at them. There's 3 papers overall, and the topics are focused on climate change, natural communities, so both aquatic, terrestrial, and really sort of ecosystem more broadly, so really much more on food web and connectivity. And then the 3rd paper is focused on restoration, both management practices and a bit more in sort of integration into, pulling in some social science aspects of what it means to do restoration on the landscape. These papers are, there's a tremendous amount of depth to the papers. I think we've reviewed over 600 articles, and they'll be ready for release probably the end of March. So we're taking a little bit more time just to make sure that we're going through and really pulling together a product that will help set up the discussion. So we're hoping to have these to you by the end of March. They will be public documents. So I know you've discussed before with informal review whether that's a public document or not a public document. So that's just something to consider. And while you're reviewing them, hopefully, we'll also ask that our interagency committee be taking a look at them. And then, of course, we're welcoming public comment on them. And these documents are really helping us form the basis for looking at alternatives overall, and then starting to get into policies, recommendations, and performance measures. So that work, we don't have any council presentations between now and May, but the next council presentation will be in May, the end of May, on policies, recommendations, and performance measures. At the end of the synthesis papers, there's a considerations and implications section, and that will help set up that discussion a bit more broadly. So once they're available publicly, we'd like to transmit them to you and let you take them from there. So whether it's an informal or a formal review by the subcommittee or the full board, that's we're open.
It seems we talked some. I think in this case it might be better to just have a single review rather than a red flag review, and then another review given the timing and given that they've already gone through significant review within the science program and within the council. But yeah, if it's possible to sequence both, and that would work, that could be useful. But I think in this is the one case where maybe just a single review might be more effective.
So then our review would basically, at the end of March, when we get the documents, you would be looking for our formal review board-wise at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
In any sort of a timeline?
If at all possible, by mid to late May.
And if it's not possible?
Then whenever is possible. I mean, the important part of that timing, and I know that's a very short time frame, but the important part of that timing is, I think, having feedback before we get into policies and recommendations would be really helpful. And certainly, I think the next big thing that would be coming out would be performance measures. So that May meeting for the council meeting would be performance measures, policies, recommendations. So being able to have feedback by the sort of mid-May would be ideal.
Any questions on the board, or just?
There's a tremendous effort going on under the California Energy Commission on climate change.
Mm-hmm.
And they have bunches of draft reports that are circulating and being reviewed now. I would be very surprised if one of those doesn't have to do with ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might want to think about getting a look at contacting whoever is doing that angle on climate change for the state and
Yep.
tie them into your white paper.
Is this the
Maybe
fourth assessment?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
We are tracking that. We're in communication with the leads over at UC Davis. One of the climate synthesis paper mentions that and touches on it.
Okay.
The council is also Separate from, within the planning division, we are going to be doing some more work on sort of a broader climate vulnerability assessment for the Delta. And that's something that's going to be longer term and much broader than just ecosystem, but the fourth assessment reports are a really important piece of that.
I just want to make sure that this effort
Yes.
isn't. Okay, very good, thanks.
Just another clarification. When those documents are released in late March, will they then be out for formal public review at the same time?
So we're not asking for formal public review. We're looking for input and for feedback. The documents the council has a history of using white papers and sort of working papers to help inform policy decisions, and so we're definitely going to be looking for feedback. But they will be they'll be working documents. They'll continue to be working documents.
Any questions from people on the phone? John, Vince, Liz? Okay, I guess we won't be able to make a decision whether or not we can do it until we actually see the documents and see what we're looking at, because if we get them, let's say, April 1st, and then we'll have our own board meeting a couple of days later, and normally our process would be to have our work group do an initial assessment, but the only meeting we would have then as a full board prior to mid-May is our early May one-day meeting to have a discussion specifically about any document we might produce. So I suppose we could produce a draft review that would need to be edited and so forth, something like that. Yes, Joy?
It doesn't seem likely that they would all finish those papers exactly at the same moment. If we get one a little bit early, could we get hold of it earlier? Could they be staggered a little bit?
If at all possible, we will try and get you drafts that are ready earlier.
Yeah, the climate change is the one that's closest.
Yeah.
It's pretty much, it's just about done, I think, right? And the other two are.
We'll need maybe another week or two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that I hate to bring it up, but we don't always have to stick to just our agreed meetings. We can sometimes, in the past, try to be responsive to especially what some of the council needs are. We have scheduled teleconference that wasn't part of a regular schedule with appropriate notification. So I'm not encouraging that, but it's an option if it would help. So
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Good idea. Tom?
Jessica, who's preparing those reports?
So it's a joint effort between council staff and our consultants.
And who are the consultants?
Stantec and ESA, Environmental Science Associates.
Okay, any other questions or input?
Actually, I have a quick question. I didn't quite catch the title and content for the second of the topics, but it seemed like there could be some alignment with the ecosystem review that you, Steve, and others are reading. So I'd just be curious to hear the subject of that review again and to see how it aligns with what we're doing.
Sure. So the title has been changing, so excuse my sort of vague description of the title, but it's really focused on Delta ecosystem overall. We're trying to avoid the ecosystem paper for the ecosystem amendment. So, but it's focused on, it walks through the various, both terrestrial and aquatic habitats in the system. It focuses a lot on food web and primary production. And discusses the sort of the land-water connection. And then it also goes into pretty good detail about some of the current management strategies and programs, for example, the Delta Smelt Resiliency Strategy, and how those programs are contributing right now to restoration. Anyways, that's sort of the overview of topics. Does that help?
Yeah, sorry, I had my phone on mute. But yes, thank you. It wasn't your omission of everything. It was just difficult to follow from a remote location. So I guess Steve and John and maybe Joy, who are working on the Delta ISB ecosystem review, do you see connections between the two efforts?
Yes, in fact, we've been discussing this and eagerly anticipated getting those reviews in the hopes that it could either help guide us on where to go or where not to go, but also provide an extensive literature review for us as a background for where we do go. So we've decided not to necessarily wait for those, but we're eagerly anticipating those as being part of our thinking. Joy, did you have a? Okay.
And we did, at the February council meeting, Ron Melser, who's the staff lead on our side, did give an overview presentation to the council. It's about 20 minutes, and it provides a much more depth on sort of the content of the papers. And so we're happy to send you that link to that presentation.
Yeah, I have
if
sent
would be
that to the
helpful.
board and
Okay.
as well as the presentation that he gave. So, Edmund, did you have a comment?
I know it's probably too early for this, but just to help out with our projected work plan, after the synthesis papers, do you envision the ecosystem amendment also going to the ISB, or do you think it's just primarily the synthesis papers? I know it's probably too early, but just to give us some room to plan.
I think we're open for input on that. The main piece of sort of the next piece of work is the policies, recommendations, and performance measures, and I think the performance measures might be of special interest to the board, and those would be coming out later in the summer, so June or July. So maybe just something to keep on your radar.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, just to reiterate, because we just did a red flag review for water supply adaptive management framework type thing. These are tedious documents, quite a bit. We had only few chapters. They are tedious. So maybe if you can stagger these things, it will be much better. So we can have some plan to finish in a proper time frame.
Be concise.
Right?
Right concisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, we as a board might consider, I know there'll be overlap probably in the documents to some degree, but maybe having even 3 small work groups, one with the climate, one with restoration, and one with the broader ecosystem, so that can help us move more quickly. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's move on to the second item, which is the Delta Science Plan.
Morning, thank you. So as John mentioned at the January Delta Independent Science Board meeting, the science program is leading the 5-year review and update of the Delta Science Plan. And so I just wanted to I'll spend about 5 minutes providing an overview of the status of the current updates, what we've done, and then propose how the ISB could be involved in the review. Just a quick reminder for just mainly the audience and maybe the new member of the ISB. The Delta Science Plan is a recommendation in the Delta Plan. It's GR1, and it's a shared document that was developed by the Delta Science community that provides guidance on the development, organization, and communication of science information in the Delta that's usable. So it's usable by decision makers in developing science-based management actions and regulatory decisions. So it was collaboratively developed, and so we'd like to maintain that engagement of collaborative input. And so we've been conducting a series of early outreach to collaborative science groups, and then also having the science program members conduct initial suggestions for review and update. So just since January, the science program has been putting in some suggestions for additional topics and edits. And so just a couple highlights. We are going to spend more detail in describing the importance of integrating social sciences into the natural and physical sciences, following the Independent Science Board's recommendation and their review of deltas of place, and also conversations that took place at the Scientific Enterprise Workshop. We're also going to be elaborating a little bit more on the Policy Science Forum, which is a venue template that we're trying to develop that will enhance the interactions between science and managers, and so science reflects management needs, and management needs can be used to develop science questions. Also, the Adaptive Management Forum is going to be developed. Also, we're going to be developing performance measures for the science plan. So that's mentioned in the current science plan, but we don't really have any. So we'll be working on that. And then also, the big one is really discussing how to jointly implement the science plan, how to better jointly implement it, and also opportunities for joint support for the actions that are mentioned in the science plan. So we've also been conducting early outreach to collaborative science groups, and the purpose for this is basically to let the community know that we are beginning this process, and also to receive really high-level input. And then we're planning to receive a lot more focused, detailed input on April 6th, which is when we'll have a public workshop, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But since January, we've been reaching out to collaborative science groups, including the Interagency Ecological Program, the Delta Regional Monitoring Program, public water agencies, and then I'll be meeting with the Collaborative Adaptive Management Team later this month. But we've been sort of describing reminding them of what the science plan is, the process, and really receiving feedback. And it's been really encouraging. There's a lot of interest, which is great, and they've provided a lot of thoughtful input. Some highlights, and these were also, a lot of these were mentioned during the IEP conference workshop, so that was great. Some of them are how are the different science groups connected together, how they work together, what management needs are they addressing. John also mentioned this during his introductory talk, is, what are structures that will better facilitate this information throughout the Delta. And we're actually having a Sea Grant State Fellow who's starting Monday as well, who has a background in social science and ecology, and he does network analysis, and so we're going to have him really contribute to that effort. Also, another comment we received or suggestion is including more horizon scanning, so emerging topics. And I think, Steve, you had mentioned this during your talk at the IEP workshop, the importance of really making sure to gauge what's coming, so there aren't really any surprises, unintended surprises. Some others are like emphasizing the importance of models and making decisions, and then being mindful and aware of all the stages of data collection to make sure that they all link towards the management question that they're intended to answer. So the next steps, we're having this public workshop on April 6th. It's from 9 to 1 p.m. at the UC Davis Sutter Square Galleria. It's on K Street in Sacramento. And if time provides, we would appreciate if a few ISB members were able to attend as observers. But we've put out a save the date, and we'll be sending out an RSVP soon. And there'll be breakout sessions, and the purpose will be to really focus on kind of topic-specific discussions that'll contribute to the science plan. So I think that's it in terms of update of what's happening now. So in terms of the Independent Science Board's involvement in the review, we had a short discussion in January, and there was agreement from the chairship about having a smaller group of ISB members provide the high-level red flag comments. And so we've had Tracy and Liz involved in that group, and we provide them with a 2-page non-public summary of just really high-level suggested changes that we were going to make, and they provided comments on the phone. We may have possibly one more of those, but that's sort of what we were thinking. And then after that, we would have a more formal ISB review. And in terms of the and then we would have a public draft. And right now, the estimate of the length of the document, the current science plan, the core document, I think is about 50 pages. And then if you add like tables and appendices, it's about 80. I'm hoping we'll probably maintain that length. But in terms of timing, we kind of want to gauge what the responses and comments that we'll receive during the public workshop, and to see based on that when would be a good time for the ISB and when would your comments would be most helpful. So either we could have it concurrently during the public review period, which will be, we're planning for it in early July, or we could have it when we had initially planned for the ISB review, which would occur in early September. And I think the plan is to provide you 60 days for the review, so you have time to make comments. So that's the current plan.
Any questions? Tracy?
Yeah, so Yumi, thanks. And remind me what Liz and I said when we were talking about because this issue of whether we would review it along with the public comment period or subsequent to that in a revision.
Yes, so I think there was notes about, because you are both involved in this early review, we would have other ISB members take the lead on the formal review.
Absolutely. With the formal ISB review, are you looking at us right now, whether it would be the July public comment period or would it be a subsequent draft that had some revisions after your public comments were received? And I just don't remember.
With the ISB?
Yeah, because you just said the ISB formal review would be either early July or early September.
Oh, yeah, so it'd be either at the same time as the public review, depending on if we get a lot of comments from the public during the public workshop, I think we might have the public review first and then incorporate their comments.
Got it, okay.
And then provide it to the ISB. I think maybe that would be.
So we haven't decided yet.
No, yeah, we were kind of going to base it off the workshop results, so it won't be for a little bit, if that's okay.
And then the question would be, does the ISB have a preference? But
yes.
Does the ISB have a preference?
I was asking Yumi what my preference was, and she didn't tell me, so.
I guess in general, we want to make sure that our review comments are valuable to you and that they can be done in a way that would still be make an impact on the final version of the plan. On the other hand, it wouldn't be as valuable for us to review, I don't think, to review something that is going to undergo then major changes with public comments and then be quite different from what we reviewed originally. So, how's that for waffling?
Yes. So is it thinking that if you have your public workshop on April 6th and you get a few comments but not much, you'll still have a public comment period, but the anticipation is you don't expect a lot of public comments. So then it would be up to us. Do we then want to review it concurrently with that public comment period and speed up the process a little bit? If, in fact, you get lots of comments and you have to make a lot of revisions before you go out for a public comment, that would be what you're saying is that would be gauging that there is a lot of public interest. You expect more public comments during that period, so it would be better at that point for us to hold off until a revision after public comment.
Yes.
Okay.
And ultimately, is there
Remind me of that next time when I.
Is there a hardcore self-inflicted deadline or?
So our current plan is to present the final document for acceptance by the council in December. It's sort of, and then come out with more of the pretty glossy document in January. It's fudgeable. We're not.
So a September review by us then would not necessarily delay that process very much?
No, yeah, we've planned it so it would be between early September and early November would be the ISB, and that would still provide us with a month to work on any of your inputs and then have time to provide it to the council.
Okay. Any questions from Liz, John, or Vince? Okay, I think they're still on. Any other questions from the board? All right, thanks. Let's go on to the next one. Gabrielle?
All right, thank you. So I'm talking about the Water Supply Adaptive Management Framework, the tedious document previously mentioned. So this framework is also called for in the Delta Science Plan, although I believe in the Science Plan it's actually referred to as a watershed level adaptive management framework, and sort of called for in parallel with an ecosystem adaptive management framework, although now those two things have become very different types of documents. And the goal of this framework is to provide information that would be important for someone who's trying to create an adaptive management plan that has to do with managing water supply. So pretty much anything that has to do with either increasing the water supply or decreasing demand or changing the distribution and availability of water. So that covers a wide range of topics, obviously. And the document as it is now, it talks about sort of the background of adaptive management and why it's useful. It provides some examples of projects that maybe could be used. And then for each of those, not really individual projects, but sort of themes of projects like desalination, groundwater conjunctive management. It provides some information about how adaptive management relates to that. For example, what are some of the uncertainties involved that could be addressed using more monitoring and science, and then what are some of the constraints as well as the possibilities that face this type of option in terms of incorporating an adaptive management plan. And some of the main target audiences for this that have been in mind all along include the Water Resources Control Board as well as DWR, but really the idea is for it to be useful to pretty much anyone in the Delta watershed who is involved in managing water supplies or who's providing funding to projects that involve managing water supplies. And of course, focusing on ones where there is some uncertainty in what will happen, because those are the cases when adaptive management can be the most valuable. As it is now, we're at about 70 pages of text for the main document, and then a fair number of figures, tables, and appendices. There's a rough draft right now of an executive summary, which is a total, including figures and tables, of about 20 pages. We're expecting that to change somewhat as we get more reviews on the main text. And the idea is that sort of the executive summary would probably be what most people end up actually reading, but that the main document has a lot more detailed information for people who want that. As for the review process, right now the Delta Science Program staff and a few people from planning in the Delta Stewardship Council also are reviewing individual chapters and providing comments back on that, and they've been very useful so far. Then, of course, as Joe mentioned, he and Jay have looked over some of it. The idea to do sort of just a red flag, point out anything that they think doesn't belong there, any big things that are missing. And we'll talk about that later today after this meeting. And then after I incorporate those comments, the idea is to send it out for a limited external review. So some people from the water boards, from DWR, maybe from some universities nearby can also have a look and just check it. We'll see if there's anything that they think is incorrect or that is missing. Though hopefully there shouldn't be anything too incorrect at that point. And so the idea is after that targeted external review, then we would send it to the Independent Science Board for the formal review, and it would be a public document at that point. And as far as timeline, I believe that we could get it to you by May or June at the latest. And I think hopefully you could maybe sort of slide it in between these other two reviews we talked about. I think it'd be nice for all of you to be able to get done with this before you get the Delta Science Plan review, since that'll probably be your biggest project for this year.
Okay, any questions, Jay?
we'll talk about this more later today, but I really encourage you to talk with some of the utility planners for some of the larger water utilities in the state, because that's really your audience. And it's going to work for them. It's going to be useful. My guess is that if you talk to them, their initial reaction will try to be, we already do that. Because in some ways they do, in some ways maybe they don't. So I think it's worth a fairly extended conversation with some of the larger, more thoughtful utility planners to see, well, what is it that they do now, and what are you asking them to really do differently? Because you're not likely to revolutionize things that they already think are successful. You're more likely to make incremental changes to how they do planning. And that's probably the more useful route of how to approach getting people to change.
Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts?
Well, this is John. Seems to me that this is a great opportunity to basically have a test run of some of the points we were making in our adaptive management review, particularly those having to do with looking at how to streamline the process, how to incorporate flexibility into it, the various points at which you can basically do things to make it work better. So I think integrating that effort with what is in the background for that adaptive management report would really be beneficial.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be really useful. And actually, the final chapter of the framework talks about sort of some of the challenges to implementing adaptive management. A lot of that is in the process and the legal framework that everything's done in. So if we could incorporate that with some specific examples or some specific suggestions, that would definitely add a lot to the document.
I trust you already have some examples here, right, of the adaptive management.
Yeah, we
and
do have
constraints and examples of them. And you are using that, the Science Board review as one of the basis while you are doing it, right?
sorry, the basis
The
for what?
science, the adaptive management report from the Science Board.
Yes.
You are using as the basis, so, starting
Yes.
from the beginning, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for your reports, because it's extremely valuable for us to know not only what you want us to review, but also the background, the framework, the timing, and the length of the reviews, and how hard the deadlines are. So this will really help us in our planning. So thank you all for nice presentations. Any public comments on this topic? Okay, I think we're scheduled for a coffee break. We should probably take that now, I think, for 15 minutes and return. Thanks again. Okay, let's reconvene. And we're starting on item number 6, the Delta Lead Science Report. John?
Great. Okay, well, so I'll start out with the paper that I sent around that is evaluating the aquatic habitat potential of flooded polders in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. This was in SVUs, just the most recent issue, and it's by John Durand from UC Davis. And it's relevant since I know the Science Board has spent time reviewing the Delta Levy investment strategy. It looks at those same issues, but in a slightly different perspective. And I presented the paper a few weeks ago to the council, since they're also obviously thinking about these issues. And really what John did was try to look at the islands, if they were to flood, what kinds of aquatic habitat they could provide, and what islands might provide the best aquatic habitat, rather than from the levy investment strategy of where are the highest priorities for protecting those areas. And he based his analysis on looking at elevation, flow, and turbidity as the key characteristics that would drive habitat potential, with higher elevations being higher value, higher flow areas being higher value, and higher turbidity being higher value. And then he used data. He collected data using LIDAR to get elevation of all the islands, and then he looked at water quality and water characteristics in adjacent channels of flow and turbidity, and then he mapped where those characteristics would be found across the delta. And he identified the 3 areas that it really relates to what other people have identified, but based on those characteristics, he showed the confluence being a potential high-value area, the Cache-Lindsay Slough area being a high-value area, and the North Delta being high-value areas, and then the South Delta being really the lowest value. And when I presented it to the council, they were actually really interested and raised a number of questions. And thought about maybe it would be this would be useful information to incorporate into the database that's being used for the Delta Levy investment strategy, to really add a new source of a new perspective on looking at the value of the islands and the value of protecting those levees. So, any thoughts or any questions on that paper?
Thank you for bringing it to our attention. I hadn't even noticed it, and this is someone coming out of UC Davis.
Yeah.
Down the hall.
Yeah, right down, yeah. It just came out. It is in the most recent issue, so.
I think it's great because they're calling them polders.
Yeah.
That's not a word that we,
Yeah.
it's a Dutch word.
Yeah, right. Actually, that came up with the council as well, so that it is
Yeah.
Dutch. And
But the illustration in there where the vertical dimension has been magnified tenfold is just spectacular, and we ought to have that as a constant reminder of the vulnerability of our polders.
yeah. Great. Well, okay, so in addition to that paper, I wanted to just mention a couple of things. I think you probably all are aware, but to make sure you are, the Bay Delta Science Conference is in September. If you're interested to present, and I think some of you, I would encourage you to think about presenting, abstracts are due April 23rd. So that is not too far away, so think about that. And as I think that it's scheduled, your meeting in September is scheduled right around that conference. So
Usually, yes.
Yeah, so the conference will be September 10th, 11th, and 12th. And the theme for this year's conference is Our Estuary at an Intersection. So thinking about that in a variety of ways, of all kinds of physical intersections, management, science intersections. So as always, I think that and the IEP meeting really are our biggest opportunity to share information, so I hope you can attend. Other things upcoming is the next week, the Salmon Disease Ecology Workshop at UC Davis, and that's a one-day workshop on disease issues, pathogens, and there will be a summary document coming out of that, so if you're interested, be happy to provide you with that when it's available.
John, on that, just so you know, yesterday I sent to Rachel Johnson, who's helping to organize a lot of that.
Yes.
Some work that we had done and some slide presentations. I had thought about inserting myself or some of my folks from the NOAA lab into that, and I decided that it just wasn't time, and she was upset with me that I hadn't done that. But I did send her some papers of the work we'd done on that issue of disease ecology in the Columbia River with fish passage. So she said she would bring that up at the meeting. So
great. Okay, and then the last thing I want to mention is a public article that maybe some of you saw that was in the New York Times. I saw it and then talked to Tom about it, and Tom encouraged me to mention it to you. 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago on a Sunday, there was a three-part article in the New York Times Magazine. It was a joint effort of the New York Times and the Times-Picayune in New Orleans, focusing on the loss of coastal areas, not just wetlands, but the impacts on communities. And one part was on a small community called Lafitte, just south of New Orleans, and the challenge of maintaining a small town in a rapidly subsiding and eroding area. And then one part was on New Orleans and issues in New Orleans. And then the third article was on Phragmites and scale insects and the impacts of scale insects are having on Phragmites, which in Louisiana they call rosacane. And it's wiping out large areas of freshwater marsh around the mouth of the Mississippi. And that in combination with subsidence is leading to even more rapid loss of wetlands in some areas. So
Yeah, and that scale infection, I think, was a fairly new thing, so. It was
it's an introduced
really good
scale.
illustration of what invasive species can do quickly.
And not very high profile, not something that most people wouldn't think about, a tiny little insect. That actually also was a problem in San Diego for Spartina, a different scale. But I think it's really worth looking at just as a public outreach effort, and a really well done, beautiful pictures. And the Times and the Picayune spent over 9 months on those series of articles, and are trying to really make an effort to raise awareness beyond the local community about how big of an issue that is. And I think for here in the Delta, it's definitely relevant. So that's all I have.
Thanks, John. Any questions to John? Tracy, do you think the presenting the results of the water quality review at that meeting, Bay Delta Conference, is valuable, or is it going to be too late, or not done yet, or?
I think Vince or Liz should definitely do that, yeah. I was approached yesterday by Martina about possibly, she's talking about doing a session on performance measures indicators, and I talked about some of the work we've done up in Puget Sound, so she's already approached me about possibly being involved in that. at the conference, but there's nothing for sure. But I think, probably a water quality would be a good place to get a lot more public comment and feedback, so, after we're done.
I'll send the New York Times articles, I'll send around a link to that so that you can easily see that.
All right, good. Any public comment on that? Okay, the next item is the reflection on the IEP workshop, and both Tracy and Dick and Tom and I were there, and Joy were at the meeting, and so a number of us can give you our opinions. I'll start out a little bit in that it was a extremely well-attended meeting. The registration was full. I think they had 400 participants. I must admit, I really enjoyed it because 3/4 of the talks were on fish, and it was also, I've been to the last 4 meetings, I think, and it's really was interesting this time to look at it from a different perspective in the sense that we're undergoing that IEP review. So I think it was a really good way to sort of get a feel for what the IEP is all about in many respects. There were a number of really good sessions, and I'm going to say this, but I really mean it, is that Joy and Michelle's paper I thought was probably the best paper I heard in that meeting, where they talked about the comparison between traditional ecological knowledge and Western ecological knowledge. And I would suggest that would be something we could get you to present here somewhere, or the Bay Delta Conference or something. That was just really valuable to me.
I second that.
Yeah. So Tracy's talk was pretty good too, but but there was a human dimensions session, which I think is a new addition to the IEP. There was a panel on the science kind of science enterprise kind of theme, which is what the workshop was held a while, the one we were involved in a few years ago now, I guess. And that was an interesting panel. And then I'm trying to think of another session. I heard some other interesting talks. The one by Shruti Khanna, which I think was fascinating because she cited a paper that had pulled together all the Landsat data, particularly for the Delta, for a number of years. And it's a tremendous amount of data looking at, and it is a data set that is available. So I think that was a really valuable. In terms of my own presentation, I just gave a summary of what the Delta has been up to. One of the comments I suggested is that we encouraged, of course, people to fill out the questionnaire for the IEP review and solicited their impact. We also passed out our flyers for both the Delta as Place and adaptive management. I suggested if people absolutely did not have a life, that they could watch us live. And one of the comments I got is somebody came up and told me, I won't say when, but they admitted they didn't have a life and followed our science board meeting. So
We'll say hi to them right now.
yeah, you can say hi to them right now if you want. But afterwards, during the question period and after my presentation and a follow-up, there was the managing editor of the San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science suggested that we specifically review that journal. And the comment was the journal was largely produced by the program and so forth, and it's been around for, 15 years or something, and that it might be time for us to review that. I also got another person talked to me for the California Water Boards and said they might have a review for us, and that but they didn't think they should approach us because they saw our very, very busy schedule. And I said, that's why we have a busy schedule, so you don't approach us. No, that's a joke, but we talked a little bit. I didn't get a lot of details, so I said, send me an email with some more detail in it as to what that review would entail and what it's about and so forth. So I don't really have much information more than that, so I'll let the board know about that. So one of the things we should talk about is the comment about whether we should review the journal. I think my answer at the time was that we don't normally wouldn't look at specifically a journal, and many journals, of course, have a impact factor analysis in that, but this would be more of a review with further conversation of whether or not the journal is being used by management. And one thought was that maybe we could think about broadening it in terms of management use of scientific information. I know we've had those conversations about how our reviews can be more valuable to management, and there's, of course, everything from flyers to personal discussions to meetings to journals in a variety of ways, and so maybe it could be taken in that context. But I think that's pretty much what I had to say about the conference itself. And Trace, I'll go around the room and see if others.
Yeah, as always, the IEP workshop is a really great time to catch up on a lot of things besides just IEP. Again, I agree, Joy. The talk you and Michelle did was like a duet. It really was, and it looked like you had really choreographed it, but it looked like you also were doing it off the cuff. It was really well done, and it really was. It was in the affirmative. It was a very affirming presentation about the potentials for combining Western ecological knowledge and traditional ecological knowledge. So, yeah, and I went to probably 2/3 of the talks. One in particular that I saw, and I talked to Louise Conrad afterwards, was one by Nick Rasmussen on treating submerged aquatic vegetation with herbicides. And then instead of just doing that, they were looking at things like if they remove the aquatic vegetation with herbicides, does it have the expected effect of reducing turbidity or increasing turbidity, which is supposed to make it better for delta smelt? And they found that a lot of their hypotheses going in about how SAV treatment would improve habitat quality for delta smelt. They don't have a large data set, so it's pretty preliminary. But so far, a lot of their things are not happening the way they predicted. It does not appear to be helping habitat quality. They also were looking at primary productivity. And again, I just told Louise I really appreciate, because they said it's been 17 years that we've been treating both floating and submerged aquatic vegetation with herbicides in the Delta. And this, as far as I can tell, is one of the first well thought out experiments to see what happens to the habitat attributes that you're trying to preserve by doing these treatments. And I urged her to please next turn to the large-scale spraying of glyphosate and other herbicides on floating aquatic vegetation, because there the application rates are much higher. I think the geography is much larger, and the potential for affecting phytoplankton and productivity in the water column is much greater. And I really would like to see some of those people. I know it takes time and it's money, but it would be really nice to see those sorts of questions being addressed in the Delta. So I lauded her on that. So. And other than that, it was just fun to hear all the stuff that was going on. So,
Tom?
Yeah, I'd third the excellent papers thing. What I thought I'd just focus my comments on, it was sort of what I thought was missing from it. The social science, the role of social science was acknowledged by several speakers, but it was interesting to listen to the discussions of stakeholders because it sounded like we're still kind of primitive in terms of understanding how to get the stakeholders, particularly the non-political ones, involved in the Delta. And there were a few people focusing on that, but not very many. The other thing was most of the papers were more focused on the present rather than the future, so that the big drivers, like there was a little bit of discussion of invasive species, but not as much as you would expect, since that's becoming such a big problem. And surprisingly, the impact of climate change and sea level rise on the Delta didn't get a lot. It's interesting to see these papers like Duran, because it's really focusing to think a little bit more about the future. And really, from a planning perspective, that's where we're going to be. And it's always very challenging because of the uncertainty in terms of making predictions. But, you know, when you look at the total body of science that was presented there, that just struck me as a gap in in the overall effort.
Go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, I guess I'll take a geologist timescale instead of an economist timescale too. And the only comment I made at the meetings was also the emphasis was too much in the present, not enough in the long term. And also we're still too court driven, too smelt driven. And I very much appreciated Steve Culberson's opening address, in which I think he had five things we needed to emphasize, and the first one was balance, and by balance he meant balance away from smelt. And his talk was, I thought, very well presented. Need to tell stories, need to think of ourselves as teachers. So I thought his talk was excellent. It was much more pleasurable than going to a meeting of economists.
Joy?
I haven't been to one of these before, and what really struck me was the huge proportion of young people in the audience and in the presentations, and men and women, and it being Women's Day and all. It was just delightful. It made me think very positively about the future.
Thanks. Well, I know John and Edmund and Darcy were there too. Do you guys want to add anything?
I thought it was, I agree with all the comments about the focus on current issues and not looking more broader long-term. But it was definitely a really useful, informative update. I thought the early discussion on the science policy issues was interesting. It'll be even more interesting to see how that proceeds in the coming months and years.
I haven't been to an IEP workshop in over 5 years. So some of the positives, I think, I felt like that a lot of talks, well, I wouldn't think that those were IEP talks, but they were brought in. So I think that was very helpful, like the human dimension part of it. A lot of the restoration planning, which actually occurs outside of IEP, were brought up. So I thought that was I'm not sure when they started doing it, but when I used to go to these, they were really focused on like IEP data that's being collected. So I thought that was a very interesting change from the past. And I think in terms of, so I couldn't attend the full workshop because I had some ISB business to take care of. But one of the sessions that I really enjoyed was the lower trophic food web dynamic session. I'm not sure if any of you guys were able to attend that. Just in terms of monitoring, I think for the first talk, it was the IEP's environmental monitoring program, the zooplankton component. They kind of touched upon how monitoring has changed. And then later on, Rosemary Hartman, who you guys heard from back in November, kind of talked about how they were like incorporating those existing monitoring stations and then using it to like add on to it to evaluate restoration of the fish restoration program sites. So that session was very interesting for me. And I think one thing that I've also I've noticed for the IEP workshop, they always begin with like an introductory presentation, which didn't occur like when I attended those in the past. And I thought that was like a very useful way of communicating and providing background to those who are not familiar with the topic.
Yeah, and I'll just echo what Edmund was saying. I feel like the focus of this workshop historically has been on the work that IEP has been doing. And so that's probably why you're seeing some of the gaps in climate change and whatnot. So, we'll maybe talk about that. I'm an IEP coordinator, so maybe we'll talk about that as maybe a potential change in focus in the future. But I think what you're getting is a lot of what IEP has worked on. I saw a lot of really good talks. In addition to the lower food web, I liked the North Delta session. I liked that there were concurrent sessions, and so part of me was split. Do I want to go with the fish or do I want to stay with the restoration and some of the process-focused talks? So I stayed in the process-focused talks. And then I just wanted to say, Tracy, I loved your talk, and it was really a nice, positive way to end the whole workshop. And and it was funny, and John and I were talking a little bit that we want to see that paper. I want to read that paper, and so we'll probably be talking about it within the science program and the Stewardship Council coming up as well.
Thanks. I wanted to say that, I mean, that talk, as you heard, was different than what others were expecting, but I basically talked about the constraints on long-term ecological monitoring. What are the things that hold us back? And I used a crazy, cranky guy from Australia and his thoughts on it, and tried to interpret Australian into English. But one of the takeaways was, and I got a lot of people immediately afterwards saying, thank you for bringing this up, is that we must have more and better and more complex models in order to be able to have more ability to predict future states. But in doing so, we run the risk of losing what we call the naturalists, the people that are out in the field. And the people that are out in the field, and that's a lot of IEP people, were, I think, very appreciative of somebody saying, don't make it all modeling. Make sure you keep the field component going. So I wasn't looking at you. So anyway, it was a fun talk to give, and it was yeah. So
Yeah, I think overall, of course, all of the papers, many of the papers had monitoring, so it was really good to see some of the monitoring kind of activities that are going on and how it's being used. And the actual session that Tracy was in at the very end was actually a really good session in terms of, the title was How IEP Data Informs Management Decision Making, and that really, all of those talks were really relevant to our IEP and monitoring reviews, yeah. So I don't know if there's any follow-up we can do, or if there's things that we should, it's one of the questions, are there things we ought to pursue in terms of help informing our IEP or monitoring reviews? Joe?
It's just a quick question as a non-attendee, because, various other reasons. You said that there's a disproportionate amount of fish talks. What was the reason for that? Is it disproportionate amount of funding, or? I don't understand the question. Why there's a question?
How can you have too many fish?
The simple answer is it's a interagency ecological program. So their focus really is ecological. Now, there's an equivalent sort of physical conference. I can't remember the name of the acronym. Starts with a C.
QUIP. That's modeling. It's modeling.
Well, that's modeling, but mostly it's modeling in the physical sense.
Physics is everywhere.
Yeah. So it's a different audience and a different emphasis. It is ecological. When you think about ecological, a lot of what drives it clearly is the endangered species, and smelt and salmon I almost started. There was this whole session on sturgeon and a whole session on longfin smelt, and then a lot of smelt and salmon stuff, and then there was a 3 or 4 talks on these are species nobody cares about, and I think that's basically was the title of that session, and so I think that's just the nature of it being an ecological thing, which I think is what IEP's focus is.
The last time there were some hydrology talks, which were very good ones. It was many years ago, and that's the reason I was asking. Yeah.
At one time, those two meetings were joined at the hip, but then they split for reasons of sociologically, who knows? And I've always wanted to try to encourage them to get back together, because I think that's where the field needs to go.
And I just wanted to remind people, I too laud the addition of the social sciences and the other aspects they put in that were not IEP driven. But again, almost I wonder whether maybe not this year, because we don't probably have enough time, although we could write up a brief summary of our impressions and takeaways and possible recommendations to consider for future IEP workshops. Because the purpose of this is really for the IEP community to have that opportunity to come together and exchange information and data and make sure they're collaborating as best they can. So you want to encourage bringing in these other viewpoints that are outside IEP, but you also don't want to lose that IEP critical mass, because they don't get that opportunity to do that very often. So it's a balance.
So any other thoughts on IEP? Yes.
I was just going to say the monitoring work group for the ISB is compiling literature, and there's only one peer review article right now in the in our archive. So I think Tracy's talk gives us number 2 for an article.
I don't know if that was peer reviewed. I don't know, I did. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about us reviewing the journal?
The journal, or you're talking about the journal or IEP?
No, the journal, San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science. That was a specific request that came up as a question and then as a follow-up kind of request by the managing editor. Yes.
Yes. So, I think journals do get reviewed, and I don't think we know anything about how journals get reviewed. But I think we could be the point group that a review of a journal gets reported to, and we evaluate the review, we report to the Delta Stewardship Council, we take responsibility to sort of see that, I think we are a better protectorate of the journal as a science board than the council is. And so I think we are sort of the right person to initiate the review, but I'm not sure we're the right person to actually oversee and do the review.
I agree with that. I think that it wouldn't have to be us to initiate it. It could be the science program to initiate it or somebody else. And then we could be recipients of that review because I don't want to go in and start looking at response times and impact factors, and that's not really our role. But if we were to look at some objective outside external review of the journal and help interpret that to the council and recommendations for ways in which the journal might be able to even have a better effect on management and policy in the Delta would be probably a useful role for us. Is it within our purview? Is the journal a science program in the Delta? Yeah, I know.
I mean, the journal is certainly something that the council has made some substantial investments in.
I mean, it's
over time.
the council is the main supporter of the journal.
Sure, and so I think there's a responsibility there to have check in on that investment. I agree with Dick and Tracy that we probably don't want to do that review, but it might be useful for us to opine when the review is done, or maybe have some informal input on how that review is mustered up. But it shouldn't take a big effort. But I think it would be a useful opportunity to reflect on it and see what changes might want to be made and make sure it's effective and make sure there's reasons to continue its support. Certainly, I think it's been a useful thing to have that journal in the mix in the community. It's provided a useful focal point. I sometimes think we don't get as much benefit out of it as we should. One of the really nice things about that journal is it's open access. And one of the continuing problems you have with any Delta scientist is they'll complain, we don't have access to journals being in a state agency. And yet they continue to publish in these, non-accessible journals. So I sense a disconnect there, and this might be able to be a way to help alleviate some of those problems.
Yeah, I think one of the, of course, all journals that go through impact factor analysis and that more or less talk about the science quality, and I think one of the follow-up questions was from, I guess, Lauren, was that how valuable is the journal to decision makers? And that's something that is not normally done in a standard journal review process, but maybe we could go ahead and figure out what questions should be asked in any sort of a review that would make it, valuable to the community.
I think that would be very useful. It is important that it's an open access journal, and unlike most open access journals, authors aren't required to pay either. So it's fully supported by the council, which I think is highly unusual for a journal that there's no payment on either side, users or authors. It has grown. So their contract is up for renewal with the council in March. At the meeting later this month. And so I can send you the information that was put together by the staff to support the renewal of the journal. The growth of it has grown significantly in terms of, not in terms of articles published, but in terms of readership. It's grown significantly over the last 5 years, and it's not included. It is included on Scopus, but it is not included on Web of Science. So it doesn't have an impact factor from Web of Science, but its improvement on Scopus over the last 5 years has been really very strong. But I think one of the questions that all those things won't answer is what Lauren asked you about, is how is it being used within the management policy community here, and is it, because it clearly is both a science journal and it's a combination science policy journal, and so thinking about that, I think getting your input on how we might evaluate that, or what would be the kinds of things we'd want to incorporate into a review would be useful, and would help sustain the support for the council within, for the journal.
Yeah, I think it would be really useful to get that report. Maybe it'll stimulate something.
Yeah, I'll send that out. I think it'll be finalized in the next few days or next week sometime, so I'll send that.
Okay, any other thoughts on that? Any public comment? Oh, Edmund.
So it seems like you guys may be considering providing a recommendation to the council to review that journal. So is that something to put on to our radar as a comment letter or recommendation to the council from the board in the future? Or do you want to hold off until you see that report from John?
I would vote to hold off until we see the report.
Yeah, we're obviously not going to have any effect on the council's decision in March as to whether to renew it. If they don't renew it, then we don't have to worry about it. But I'm pretty sure they will. I think what we need to articulate our thoughts a little better as to, we are agreeing, I think, that some review of SPOOs would be good to be done, and we are trying to figure out what our role in that would be. How to help frame it. We know we don't want to do the review, but we probably could be helpful in framing that review.
So maybe a discussion topic in May again.
Yeah, or April.
Okay.
I guess I would suggest, to save us all time, have John and one or two people from the board and one or two other people talk about, well, how would we really do this kind of review, and I don't think we need to bring it before the board before we have something concrete that is going to likely to work for the journal and the council and for us.
So is there some sort of an association of open journals that also does peer review of their journals, or we don't know yet? So
I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
does anyone else know of anything like that?
Or would Lauren Muscadine know, or?
I can check in with her
Yeah,
and see.
how could we get started? I guess that's the question. Yeah.
Just to interject, I have been running a journal for 10 years now for Springer. One of the things they do, it's a little different kind of journal. It's not regional, but this is more of a regional type journal. Of course, the first thing is the impact factor, how it, for the past 10 years, how it went up, and then amount of submittals and the submittal rejection rates. So they just consider as a prestige factor sometimes on those things. And one of the most important is that they reach out to the community, the publisher, and ask how much it has helped them, the science-wise, not really the policy-wise in that journal. Science-wise, they have helped them, and what made them to publish in that thing or not publish in that thing. So those type of things available from journal publishers, especially Springer or Cambridge University Press. So you might want to check that, what is the typical, and take the things which you want to take in. Now here is no impact factor, so that's not a big issue.
So do they get that information through a survey where they're
yes,
getting?
Yes, they do.
They do a
have a survey
to authors.
They send out to the community, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is some brief updates on some of our reviews, and Vince will start out with IEP. Vince, have you returned?
Yes, I have.
Okay, if you can
Can you
leave
not
the...
hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. We've made actually quite a bit of progress on the IEP review, and I'll talk about that first. First of all, the latest prospectus on that review is on the Delta ISB's product webpage. And as you know, we've gone back and forth various times emphasizing different things with that. Perhaps more importantly, the questionnaire that all of you have seen has been shared with the 1,500 members of the IEP listserv. It's due back on March 23rd, and already we have 48 responses thus far. We actually didn't modify the content of the IEP questionnaire from what you saw, but what we did modify, based on the comments of Sakura Evans, who was, of course, running the IEP meeting that was just described, is that it would be good if we separated perceptions from value judgments or valuations of the of how IEP is dealing with different issues. And Dick really helped quite a bit in terms of framing those questions a little better. We're hoping that our new ISB fellow will help with synthesizing and processing the data when she arrives next week. Of course, we're not going to have that next week, but this would be one of the things that she chooses to do. We also have links on the ISB meeting webpage for those that are not part of the listserv that may want to participate in that as well. One of the things that we also will do is the work group, which is Liz, Tracy, Dick, and I, will be conducting interviews around the time of the May meeting. We'll be coming in a few days early. One of the things I would like the whole ISB to look at is we did something very different in preparing this review, in that we have the prospectus, which really is giving us a series of review items. We now have the questionnaire, which is giving us the information of both perceptions and of evaluations. But we wanted to examine these in terms of a series of starting positions. Now, these starting positions are a mixture of hypotheses of what we thought we would be getting a response of, and also, some material right out of the prospectus. So we're calling this a crosswalk, a review crosswalk. And it would be very good if people could look at that and get us some comments back, certainly before the 23rd of March, when these questionnaires start coming in. That would be very, very helpful for us in terms if you see any of these starting positions that just, aren't really tied to the questionnaire or tied to the prospectus, or others that you would propose that we use in our analysis. So that's pretty much where we are with the ISB review. We're really quite pleased with the progress that we've been making, and the subgroup has really been working quite hard on this. Any questions from the board about this? Can you still hear me?
So your interviews, Vince, do you have those set up yet, or for May?
No, we don't. We have a huge list of names that we're going to have to hone down in terms of picking who we're going to speak to. But no, we have not set those up yet. One of the problems, of course, is that three of us have been involved in trying to get this water quality review done, and again, there's some similarities and overlap, certainly more with the monitoring review, but with this IEP review as well. So this will be something that we'll work on in the next couple of weeks.
After the water quality review is done. Hey, Vince, have we thought, if there's four of us on this working group for doing the interviews, are we going to break up into groups of two, sort of like we did originally for our habitat restoration review? And so we don't all...
That's what we were thinking of, yeah.
That's what I thought, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it would make more sense to do that.
And Dick got stuck with me, is that
And then,
right?
and then again, depending on who is on the evaluation of the consultant for the monitoring enterprise review, that may complicate it a little. We have a tentative division of how that week would work, but again, it's going to be dependent on how many proposals we get, and that's something I'll talk in about the next review.
Okay, no other questions? All right, let's move on to the monitoring review. Vince?
Well, the monitoring review, the RFP is out. It was released on January 11th. Proposals are due on April 18th. The questionnaire that all of you saw, we got some good feedback from Tom about that, and we're going to incorporate that. But we also decided to incorporate this idea of perceptions versus evaluations in terms of not modifying the content as much as modifying the approach that we're using to get information. And the help that we got from Dick on this will certainly help us in doing that. We are going to have at the May meeting, Chris Potter will give us a seminar as part of that brown bag series on monitoring of looking at remote sensing methods to detect invasive weeds. And there's a variety of approaches that we're considering about the panel to go along with that. And I don't know, Steve, do you want to mention where we are thinking about with that, or should we just hold off on which of those panel options we're going to take?
I think it's go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and just tell folks where we're at?
Yeah, well, there's several ideas that we've been thinking about. One of which is, of course, there's a huge group of federal agencies that are doing monitoring, both in the Delta, but even more beyond the Delta. And Edmund has really been putting together a list of these agencies that are doing a lot of different things, and where, whether this will be in one workshop or we'll actually expand it to have more material. But this is something that we're thinking of also having as panelists for the May meeting. The idea came up of maybe having a panel on fish assessment methods. That again is Dick just brought out, to try to get away from the issue of Delta smelt incidental take, but to make it broader on all of these issues on assessment. So I think we're making very good progress. We've got a flow chart about the how we'll do the analysis of the consultant proposals that are submitted. There's a lot of unknowns about how many there'll actually be submitted, and the process of being vetted for conflict of interest and everything else. But I think we're finally making some good progress, and with the hope that in June we actually have a consultant with a signed contract.
So Vince, this is Tracy. I think, and I agree, we're not quite settled yet, but I think what we're talking about for May is, in addition to the seminar on remote sensing of aquatic vegetation, having a panel that likely would be mostly focused on remote sensing capabilities in the Delta, as well as some additional aquatic vegetation input.
Right.
And then the
right.
federal, what we talked about was, there are a number of federal programs that do a lot of monitoring nationally and regionally and internationally, and they collect a lot of information in the Delta, but they collect it all over the place. And so the question is, how do we get a handle on whether those, especially federal programs that are much larger in scale than the Delta, but still have very relevant data for the Delta, how do we get a handle on what those data are, and so that we can, in our review, help to evaluate whether or not those federally collected data are accessible, are known, and are being used in the monitoring enterprise in the Delta. At least that's how we framed it up a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course the issue
And that would be
is,
later than May.
Will we involve the consultant in this? Edmund has been starting to put this information together. So, yeah, that's going to be something for sure we're going to want to include in the review, but whether we'll do it a little later or with this. That's why I said, it's not fully formed yet how we're going to have this May, who's going to be on the May panel.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to provide a little background for the format, I think for the May, it'll actually be a continuation of the Delta Monitoring Enterprise Brown Bag series that the ISB hosted in November and January. So the format in terms of questions will be very similar for the panelists and for the presenter. But the federal panel that was mentioned will have a different scope and ask and format compared to the other brown bag and panel discussions. So we're still working on that, but if you guys have ideas for the ask or specific panel questions, I think Tracy mentioned a few, just email them to me and then we'll eventually have a format document as we approach the federal panel down the line.
Yeah, and we'd also be interested in hearing if folks have any ideas on who should be involved in that federal panel, either who by agency or maybe individually. One of those, for example, which I'd be interested to get Jay's input on, is the like the River Forecasting Center, the California Nevada River Forecasting, which does a lot of monitoring. And the question is, is that something that, what do they do? And then secondly, do people use that? But we could bring them in and say, what do you do? What do you collect? What do you?
Good idea.
Yeah, and if there's others like that are sort of federal, to identify those federal programs and then zero in on trying to think who particularly can summarize some of that, what's being done. So we're looking for ideas for anybody who's.
The river forecasting is a good idea.
Because River Forecast Center often involves, and the flood warning folks have a lot of monitoring stations that are run federally, state, and local agencies, and they have to have quality control, and they have to be able to work in real time to make that stuff work for flood control and evacuations.
Yeah. And then we figure the Weather Service, which I know is tied into that, but in terms of their weather forecasting centers, but they also have a number of different.
Well, the River Forecasting Center for California actually is both DWR and the National Weather Service, so it's federal and state operations center to do it.
Yeah, one of the things we realized from our discussion this morning, there's an awful lot of stuff out there, and just getting lists of what are being monitored is going to be a very, very big contribution. And again, this is something that the consultant may be involved with it as well.
Hey Vince, I think it's a good idea to have this federal panel scheduled down the line when a consultant's in place, because I think a lot of the asks, like what is being monitored, how are you using it, kind of fits into that inventory aspect of what the consultant will be working on.
Right, I agree with you, yeah. Otherwise, Edmund will be asking you to work even more on these things with us.
Okay, any other input or questions for Vince? Any public comment on this topic? Okay, well, we're at the lunch hour, 15 minutes ahead of time, so we need to figure out what to do. I don't know that there's any topic further on that we could squeeze in. The alternative would be just to go to lunch and come back 15 minutes earlier. I don't see any strong opinions one way or the other. Vince, is that something, I'm sorry, Edmund, is that something we can do?
I think it is, but we are doing like a off-site lunch, so it may just help us with timing anyway, so you guys have a little more time for lunch.
Restarted the regular.
Okay, so let's break for lunch and we'll be back at 12:45. Okay, welcome back to the Delta Independent Science Board meeting. I want to check and see if our phone folks are here. John, are you on the line?
Yes.
And Vince?
Yes.
Okay, and Liz has apologized and she had to sign off. So we'll start with the next item, number 9, Water Supply Reliability Review. Jay?
So I've been neglectful of my duties and have not revised the prospectus. My excuse for that is that Tom has just recently joined the board. I wanted to make sure he had a chance to read it over. And over lunch, we caught up a little bit. Joe and Tom and I had a little conversation on this. I promise once again to revise the prospectus. What I'm thinking of is to revise it probably by shortening most of the paragraphs and devote a little bit more time to the tentative report outline, because I think that's a little bit more tangible and useful. And add a little bit of...
Well, I can't, but it's not on, because I've got to be cooking.
If someone's on the line, they should mute their mic.
So anyway, I think probably the general direction I'm thinking of for the revision of the prospectus is to start off with a little review of the purposes of water supply reliability estimation. The sort of the philosophical direction we've been talking about is to have this water supply reliability review focus on the science of estimating reliability as it would apply to the Delta problems. And so start off with a discussion of the purposes of this estimation and the rather interesting issues we have of, are we estimating reliability only of the Delta water supplies or of the overall water supplies for the different water users, which is more directly useful, I think. There's often a saying in Delta water supply that there's 100% of reliability on Delta water supply unless you want quality. So water quality is obviously going to be a part of this. We have a lot of different planning horizons that we look at for water supply reliability: long-term planning, facilities planning, versus seasonal operations, versus within a tidal cycle kinds of operations for different purposes. A lot of things are changing in the Delta. Certainly climate is going to be changing, water demands, regulations, technology. And outside of the Delta, there are some things that are going to be affecting how we value the reliability of water supplies in the Delta, such as the ending of groundwater overdraft in this San Joaquin Basin. So start off with a discussion of that, have an inventory of different estimations that are made of water supply reliability for and around the Delta. Then look at some technical approaches for estimating water supply reliability, sort of a little more academic, scholarly view of it. Have a section on desirable characteristics of water supply reliability estimation, transparency, and whatever we decide. Then do some comparative analysis of estimation methods. Talk about how those different approaches of estimating reliability work into water supply reliability planning, portfolios, water rights, regulations, agreements, water markets, things like that. And then I think before conclusions, have some examination of trade-offs in water supply reliability between costs and reliability, quality and quantity, some hedging versus looking at do you like frequent small shortages or infrequent large shortages? There's often some operational trade-offs you have there. And then, of course, environmental costs of water supply reliability. I think there'll be something in that for everybody to disagree with. So that's where we are. I think at this point I'll try to revise this a little more formally, send it to our little group and let them kick it around, and then send it to the larger group and let them kick it around.
So Jay, are you still thinking about some sort of a workshop down the road, or?
Yeah, I think we should be looking at, since there are several groups out there that do some of this, and we've had one set of panel presentations more than a year or so ago on this that I thought was very useful. I'm a little tempted to try to do something like what Brian did with delta levees. I think that would be kind of fun. So maybe we'll have to sort of think about what time frame makes sense for that. Maybe September or something. Or more likely October, I would guess.
October will be a teleconference.
Then maybe November. That's all I've got.
Okay, any questions or discussion from any of the board members? We have 40 minutes for this on the agenda, so.
I should have started talking very slowly then.
Jay, can I make a comment?
Sure.
One of the comments so far we have received is also kind of raising about the models, calcium, and the difficulty of using them
Right.
and codifying them. Should we include that type of a exposition?
I think we have to, because there's certain, there's certain uncertainties in those models, certainly uncertainties in those models, and they're changing all the time. And different people use them and come up with little different answers. They can't all be right. So I think we're going to have to discuss some of that. And that's probably one of the more useful things we can talk about. Calcium 3 has just been released. And they're having a couple of new revisions of that, I think, even scheduled.
Okay, Vince or John, any questions?
No, nothing here.
Tracy? No. Don't touch that mic or you're going to have to talk. Okay, any public comment on this? All right, I guess we're ready to move on to the next topic, which is the ecosystem review. You should have all received just a two-page discussion document on this, and our group is John and Joy and Dick and myself, and our hope during this discussion is to actually have a discussion. And so really as an idea generating kind of time we want to have. This document is more or less designed to be to help stimulate ideas. And anyway, that's the nature of it. As we said earlier, we are anxiously waiting for the white papers for the ecosystem amendment, because we think those will help us in some way or form. And John, did you want to start off the discussion? John and I are co-leading this, so I'm pushing it all over to him.
Yeah, I'm at home, and I'm multitasking. I've got some hamburger buns that I'm baking that are due to come out of the oven in about 2 minutes, and then I can devote all my attention to this instead of watching the buns burn.
Okay, you're breaking up, and I don't know, maybe you're if you're using a speakerphone or something.
I will, let me try in a couple of minutes to join you again.
Okay. Yeah. All right, well, the way this, I'll go through this, we've had various numbers of conference calls, or at least a couple of conference calls on this topic, and exchange of ideas and an exchange of questions that we've all kind of generated, and came up with sort of, the observations really are things that I think came up in our discussions, which we were assuming to be important topics and important observations. I don't know if we would claim that they're absolutely true, but I think that, the things about clearly ecosystem management is mandated, the connectivity of the system, the constant changing, whether intentional or not, due to habitat alteration, invasive species, and pollution. Future changes are inevitable, and that much of the management is focused on regulating water levels and protecting individual species. Adaptive management is required. Ecosystem approach necessarily deals with multiple stressors and multiple benefits. And then that last one, effective restoration requires understanding of food webs and so forth. So we came up with some fundamental questions, and specifically addressing, again, is these major topics about ecosystem connectivity, which did come up a lot in the IEP workshop, as well as ecosystem change, the question of are we prepared to have any ecosystem predictability, and of course restoration. And that's sort of where we're at, and the ideas on how to do this is, of course, to review the white papers. We thought we'd set up some management-relevant ecosystem-level strategic questions to explore the adequacy of the science to test them, because one of the, I guess, difficulties we're having is that ecosystem is such a broad topic, and how do we put together a review that would be a benefit to management and decision makers? And maybe by asking them what sort of ecosystem level questions are of value might help us to point science in the right direction. We thought about inviting some thought-provoking speakers. We talked about a panel, or actually a panel as shown here, again, with maybe one with managers, say what are your ecosystem level goals, and help us to better define the topics we might look at, and maybe one with scientists about ecosystem capabilities. But we've also considered, and have also considered the thought of a workshop like the levy workshop, which might be a way to help prioritize sort of, or think about strategic science priorities on this topic. So, Dick or Joy, do you want to add to that, or?
Let me break in here.
Okay, John.
John again. Can you hear me?
You sound great.
Yeah, I think that what we've been wrestling with and going back and forth with is ecosystem science potentially encompasses almost everything that goes on in the Delta, if one wants to think about it beyond a very focused species-specific or site-specific way, which we tend to feel is not really the best way to approach things. So what we need to do is to figure out where in all this potential morass of ecosystem science we could best put our effort in terms of reviewing the state of science as it applies to issues in the Delta that is a more targeted thing, sort of like water quality review, not take on everything, but narrow it down some. And I think we're at the point where we just kind of throw up our hands, we go back and forth. One of us has one particular perspective, another of us is championing something else. So we need some guidance, and I think ultimately we're going to need guidance based upon the white papers and upon some of these panels into what we really dig into. On the other hand, we're going to be much better off if we have a fairly constrained roadmap to begin with, rather than going to a bunch of managers and saying, well, ecosystems are important. What do you think we ought to look at?
This is Tracy. I like the way you guys are trying to frame it up and sort of constrain it, especially if you folks are going to try to constrain it for us, and then the rest of us can make it work. And I like the four questions you've asked, the sort of the four, as I understand the description that you've given, Steve, and that you've added on to, John. What you're saying is ecosystems are everything and everywhere, but we're going to try to look at these four issues and try to understand whether or not the science in the Delta is adequate to give us an understanding of ecosystem connectivity, change, predictability, et cetera. The only thing I would say is the I wonder about ecosystem restoration, if that is too much. I don't know. We did our big restoration assessment, but that has been quite a few years. I would look to even constrain it a little more, maybe not take on all 4 of these is my thinking.
Yeah, Joy?
I don't know if that was stuck in there for me or not, but I can't think about restoration without thinking about ecosystems. So if there's going to be a review of ecosystem science, it should be done with the eye to the restoration work that is underway and that will occur in the future. So it can stop short of actually reviewing the restoration literature, depending on what we see from the white paper. But I think, for me, I'm very pragmatic, and I need to know exactly what in the ecosystem, well, first of all, what is an ecosystem? Are we talking about the delta? Or are we talking about hundreds of ecosystems within the delta? Or we haven't defined that, and we need to early on, so as not to confuse. But then all of what are the key structural and functional attributes that we might aim to create or restore in that next phase, which would be the restoration review. But this would set the stage for that.
I think I understand and I agree. I think the first 3 all are very important for being able to better manage or predict or project restoration. And I think obviously with ecosystems, a big focus in the Delta is the large amounts of restoration that are planned and projected. So all of those first 3 would feed into ecosystem restoration science.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be obviously a good framing principle for how you would look at those 3. But it wouldn't be limited to just restoration, I don't think.
Dave?
Yeah, I'm beginning to see the ingeniousness of what you've got now here, Steve, after all the trouble we've given you. And I really do see that the 4 are quite comprehensive and ecosystemic when you look at them all together, and especially when you add the process part of it as a way of going at it. And I am intrigued a little bit by Joy's, ecosystem at what level, because the Delta is, many different landscape scales. And then I think back to the last 3 days and how few times I did feel like we were thinking ecologically as, well, you could think of the fish, thinking its habitat, but not really from a, ecological, looking down at the fish level. And so we might not really find that there's a whole lot of ecological science that fits the model we now have here. And so it could be a very short review, and that could be nice. But I wonder, how we'll get a sense of to what extent there is an understanding within the Delta science community of science at this level. There may be more than we see, or that we will have in the articles that we review, or...
Yeah, I would tend to agree, just again, listening to the IEP talks, is that if you, instead of use the word ecosystem, if you stuck a fish's name in there or something like that, and how things might change that affect that particular species or this species or that species, there's that kind of thinking going on, I think. The connectivity is a good example of talks we heard about the San Francisco Bay and the various parts of the Delta relative to an individual species. But when you put it in terms of the ecosystem, even in terms of restoration, a lot of the restoration is that we heard about is focused on for the good of species X or the good of species Y, or sometimes it's the good of X and to the bad of Y. There's one paper on that. So, but in terms of ecosystem, I'm not sure, I tend to agree with you, I'm not sure at that level what is being done, so.
I think we need to recognize that a lot of what goes on in the Delta is driven by the Endangered Species Act and the status of particular species, and that explains why so much of it is so species-centric. And I think if we're going, one of the things an ecosystem review can do implicitly rather than perhaps explicitly is to begin to force the thinking away from a sort of a species at a time approach to restoration or habitat management or whatever it is, to thinking in terms of ecosystems, landscapes, interactions, the kinds of things that really are important to making the Delta run. And I recognize that there are compelling legal reasons why there's this emphasis upon endangered species, but some of the emphasis of this book that I'm writing that keeps me from participating as much as I ought to is to try to shift conservation thinking away from a single species, endangered species approach to a broader approach. So it kind of fits that. So that's the drum that I would beat along the way.
The other John?
Yeah, so I think you definitely seeing the synthesis papers will be of interest because the ecosystem paper, the second paper, a big part of it is connectivity, and both spatial, temporal connectivity and food web connectivity. So I think, we're sort of homing in on the same issues, and the change issues and predictability. That the climate change chapter, I think, will have a significant. That's a big part of that. So I think waiting to see what those papers have to say, and seeing how you can add to that and build on that perspective would be very useful. I mean, I think definitely, as John just pointed out, the legal constraints of working around species is there, and we can't avoid it. But there is very much awareness about really trying to break through that. And I think if the ISB can give some guidance and give some bigger thoughts, and especially thinking about how that's been done in other systems, I think could be really useful and powerful here.
So one of the questions on those white papers, are they largely a review of the literature in terms of the state of our knowledge on this topic, or do they go beyond that and look at gaps, strategic research priorities, where the research ought to be going?
Their state of the knowledge, they don't get to that. So I think if you guys could add on.
So we could do this latter half of
that
kind of thing.
That could be useful.
Okay. Jay?
Go ahead.
For John, can you share with us their definition of ecosystem for that paper's perspective?
I think they're looking at it as not, in a mix of scales, both the whole delta as a single ecosystem, but then looking at, different components. So they originally, actually, I haven't seen the most recent revision, but originally it was a broad review of all the different components of, looking at channel habitat, looking at freshwater tidal habitat, looking at riparian floodplain habitat. And we encourage them to get beyond just describing them, to really get at how they are important and how those linkages are really, how connectivity really across different systems is something that needs to be addressed.
I'm not sure if that's still the case.
I'm pretty certain, I know they're looking at it across a mix of scales.
Okay, Jay?
I don't know much about ecosystems, but one thing that's always impressed me about the Delta is you have these tremendous tidal fluxes that vary over time and weekly scales and 19-year time scales, as well as freshwater flows that sort of connect everything differently in space and time with different species and different aspects of the ecosystem, different ecosystem processes. And perhaps because I'm just a dumb engineer, I always sort of see that physics as the basic thing that's connecting it all. One of the basic things that's connecting it all. And certainly the water quality rides on top of that, and the critters right on top of that.
And animals can move back and forth.
Yeah,
equally.
yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Vince, you have any thoughts?
Sorry, I'm just coming off mute. I was actually a little confused as to why you chose climate change, which is clearly a large one looming in the future, and invasive species, where you're going to be looking at the effects of the past. I mean, you could have gone contaminants, and again, I understand what you're both saying about keeping it narrow. Saying initially you're going to look at those two makes me think that, well, then later you're going to look at others, and that it is, in fact, is going to end up as a very broad review. So that was really kind of the first reaction that I had when I looked at that.
I'm just trying to find where we said that.
It's the under fundamental questions, the second, we will initially focus on ecosystem responses to climate change and invasive species as first-order drivers.
Oh, gotcha.
We will specifically address. I mean, that I agree with all that, but it just seemed odd that you were looking at the way you worded that. I was wondering if the implication to me was that you're going to look at a bunch of other, maybe you're going to call them second-order drivers, but that we're getting back to the ranking of contaminants and water supply reliability for ecosystems.
Yeah, I'll take the blame for that wording, and it was intentionally meant to be nebulous as something that, not that first order is any important than second order, but the first order of things we would do. And mainly, I don't know if there's any real rationale other than that climate change and invasive species kept coming up into our discussions as some of the key drivers. We've talked about, and I think I sent a slide to the other folks, of the principal drivers, which are, as we all know, habitat change and resource use. Resource use doesn't seem to be a major thing in the Delta, and of course contaminants is one, and events. Pardon?
The use of water itself is a resource use.
But the actual that could be true. But the driver on that is the habitat alteration, at least from an ecosystem point of view, and that's the only reason. In my mind, plus we've talked about those a lot, but just an attempt to try and narrow it down. But it could be we could take any one of these, or we could include them all the drivers.
Yeah. Well, in the water quality review, if you remember in the beginning, we just had to eliminate some, passing it off to the future committee members that this would be the approach. That was my initial reaction to that statement.
In the very first discussion of this, remember we took some of these original ideas from the panels that we had, and in our very first discussion, we talked about doing an ecosystem review as step one, followed by a review of restoration again. It's sort of a second phase restoration that was still somewhat needed better definition. And right now, we haven't talked much about that, but I could see that, restoration in the form of habitat alteration, things like that could be rolled into that, perhaps. Following up on Tracy's comment about habitat or restoration, so. Yes, Joy.
One of my interests is what's missing in a lot of the literature, and that's the interactions between the drivers and the possibility of setting up scenarios that would be worst case and not so bad, and then really best case, and use those scenarios to generate questions about how much we know, where are we missing information, to figure out what will be the worst case, the intermediate, and the best case. But I didn't detect much enthusiasm for the scenario thing, because John mentioned, well, that would get us deeply into modeling, but that wasn't my intent. I was thinking of conceptual models.
Don't say that modeling like it's a bad.
I'm sorry?
That was sort of in the second bullet there, in the process ideas, management relevant, first level, but maybe we could add, maybe that's where the scenario play out would be in terms of.
I know it's been useful to other people.
Yeah, I think it comes in more in terms of how we approach whatever narrowed down topic we select or topics. I think using the conceptual scenario analysis and then exploring what kind of information is necessary or missing to inform that scenario, I think that could be a very effective structure for doing it, but I think we need to decide on the topic. It could apply to almost any of these topics, ecosystem-related topics that we've mentioned.
And I guess my point would be that it's not that we do the scenario, but that we be aware that, it should be something that should be used in the literature. It would be something that we would be wanting to be seen. It would be something we wish our scientists were doing.
I wish they were doing scenarios.
Yeah. We don't have to do it.
Just along those lines, we're not really sure what's going to happen with the delta, any way we manage it. So it does make sense to look at some scenarios in an organized way, and to look at management options in that same kind of way, and management contingencies and preparations. And that's going to often have some legal implications. If you haven't seen species X for so many years, does that mean it's time for a change in policy? Right. So it can have both positive opportunities that way and negative things that we don't really like to consider, but we probably should.
Any other thoughts? Tracy said we should talk about next steps, and
Just that I can't follow it. What I got to do, Bob.
Clearly, one of the next steps is to get a hold of those white papers, I guess. It seems we originally thought we would move forward in parallel, thinking that we were on a different time scale, but it seems now if we're going to get them in 3 weeks, that might be useful, and then we can look at, and one of those will be on the climate, one of them will be restoration as drivers, and the other one hodgepodge of the rest. And so I'm going to suggest we just, first of all, take any comments you might have if you have any other thoughts on this or ideas, and don't worry about wordsmithing, but on the level that Vince had in terms of why are we picking these two, and because we don't have a good rationale for that. And then we can wait till we get the first cut of those white papers and have the work group meet again and see whether that puts us into another light. I mean, part of my thinking as one is to we've started out many of these reviews with very, very big topics like water quality or adaptive management or monitoring, and then as we move along, it tends to sort of narrow itself, and and maybe we're getting close enough that we're sort of along that line with the input we get from the white papers and see how much to do. And going back to what Dick said, is that maybe just taking the topic of ecosystem and see how well the science is on that area, define it and go through and follow through, and then maybe that'll, as we go, we'll say, okay, invasive species and food webs is something we'll use as one of the detailed scenarios as an example. So anyway, that's my suggestion, is basically we do nothing until we get the white papers. John, what are your thoughts? John Weens?
I'm trying to get unmuted. I think that's a good idea. Kicking the can down the road seems to be the way to do things these days, so why not us?
Any other thoughts or input? If anyone has some brilliant ideas, by all means, they can just write it down and send it to us, and we're happy to adopt them. So, Dick?
I would make our fourth bullet, instead of ecosystem restoration, just make it ecosystem management.
That's a good idea.
Just like water management, just like species management, and then it's much more neutral, and we're not trying to restore the past, we're just managing ecosystems. And
I think that I like your point, and I would encourage. I'd love to get your input, hear what you have to say about how it's addressed in the restoration chapter, because Ron Meltzer and the consultants who worked on that thought a lot about how to present it, and currently it's being presented sort of as a range of management opportunities within the Delta, from conserving areas to restoring areas in a more traditional sense of restoration, to managing in a very different way for different kinds of systems, to using, trying to manage working lands or other more impacted lands in a positive sense. So using a range of different tools or different approaches. And I think getting your thoughts on that, and if that's a good way forward, because I think they had the same discussion and the staff had the same discussion of, we don't want it to imply that we're just trying to go back.
I actually like ecosystem futuration. In light of climate change, we should be preparing for what's coming.
So, yeah, I think we're happy to get input on that, and that could be an interesting.
Or just broadening the vocabulary instead of aiming backwards.
Okay, we are, of course, now also happy to take any edits, extra bullets, anything like that, to kind of maybe use this as a starting point to flush out more of our ideas too. So just send them to Edmund, I think, or John and I to start.
Give us a date.
What's that?
Give us a date. Time.
About 2 o'clock, I think.
Okay.
Well, we're not going to discuss this till so a week or two is fine. Yeah. Okay, any public comment on? Good. We got some real input.
I'll have to get a blue card after the meeting. Is that all right, Nick? Okay, just need to be tough. All right, Joanne Vinton, for the record. Just very briefly, when you were earlier talking about the Endangered Species Act and how that focuses on the species, and when you really want to look at the broader picture, I see that, but I also hear often the other side, where the ESA has been a great tool to protect ecosystems, and there's a lot of fear that if that is weakened, the politics will screw things up. So that's
true. Thanks. Okay, I guess we're ready to move on to the next topic, and that is the preparation for the upcoming meetings. We do have a teleconference scheduled in April. I believe that is not going to start now until 10:30. Is that true, Edmund?
Yes, the council will be having an all-hands meeting at 9. So we'll have to, the ISB will have to start at 10:30.
And what's the date of that again?
April 3rd.
Okay, so April 3rd at 10:30. And one of the questions is, do we want to run WebEx on that teleconference? Are people finding that useful, or?
It is useful, yeah.
Okay, so if one person finds it useful, that's fine. We'll, of course, give our status updates. Maybe we can get our new student fellow to come in and say a few words about her background. I guess the water quality revision or approval action item will probably be the big topic.
And my thinking about it on a little more and talking about the graphics, I'm a little dubious that we will have it ready 10 days ahead of time for a formal action item. So it'll be a point of discussion.
Okay.
But I don't think it'll be, I just don't see it being ready for an action item.
Okay. Anything else that's come up that we should have on that agenda other than our typical?
Does Jay envision having a revised prospectus for water supply, or you want to aim for May?
Let's make me have something by April.
Okay.
See if that works.
And the other thing too is a follow-up on whether the ISB wants to do a comment letter about the journal from San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences. I think Jay mentioned maybe doing a work group to draft a comment letter of some sort.
I don't know that we need a comment letter, we just need to talk.
Oh yeah, but
That's, what level of formality do we need to elevate everything to?
if it comes from the full board, just have documentation.
If we decide it's necessary, we could do that.
Yeah, we're going to all get copies of that.
Like a discussion. I mean, actually, we'll see if we have a discussion offline with a smaller group, potentially, and then maybe we will come back to that in April, or maybe we will wait, depending on what the subgroup feels like is most important.
But we'll get the report from the...
Yeah, I will send you the staff report that's going to the council in the next week. So I'll do that.
Okay. Anything else for April? Okay, the May meeting is going to be, right now for the board, the May meeting is scheduled to be Thursday, May 3rd, and run from 8 to 4:30 on Thursday. And at that time, we'll have a panel of some sort, and it'll be coincide also with the brown bag lunch by Potter, I think. Prior to that, there will be the, very possibly the, well, I guess for sure, the in-person reviews by a subgroup of the monitoring proposals. And then there'll be another subgroup that are meeting, I think, on that, for the IEP review, doing the interviews on a half a day on Wednesday and a full day on Friday, I think is the schedule, right? Anything else? And that maybe
Steve,
Yes,
could
Vince.
we try to get a set of rooms booked for us at the that new hotel over at the by the arena that you and several others stayed at?
Sure, can we get Terry to check? And
Yeah, we can follow up to see if it's possible or not, but I think it's going to be over the rate of the government.
Yeah, Vince, what we've pretty much concluded for that, it's a nice place, yeah. But they won't book a block of rooms at a government rate. It doesn't make sense not to lock in a low rate when they can usually do much better. And it's, my estimate is it's better, if you really want to stay there, you need to just call them yourself and see if you can get something close to a government rate. But they won't book a block of rooms.
yeah, I've already tried to get rooms for that week, and I can't find anything in the city statewide, so, at state government rates, so I don't know what's going on, but
Okay, but Terry Ann will definitely give you guys an option to have booked rooms, but whether you guys want to stay at the hotel, that hotel or not, will be up
Right.
to you guys.
Right.
So going back to the schedule for that week, so half a day Wednesday and all day Friday, or was it all day Wednesday and half a day Friday for the IEP interviews?
half Wednesday, all day Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think once we lock things down, it may change, but just keep those timeframes open.
Okay.
Just as a thought, since you'll probably have a lot of interviews for a lot of these things. If you need additional people outside these members to be the second person on some of the interviews, just draft some of this, because I'm local anyway.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I guess we won't know right now it's 2.5 days to review the proposals?
Yeah, we won't know until the deadline for proposals ends.
And then you would shave off the Monday, I presume?
Yeah, we'll make adjustments based on how many proposals. And it depends on how long you guys will take per proposal. Right now, we're estimating 1.5 hours from past experience of other council staff. But if you guys think you guys will need more than 1.5 hours, that's another logistic.
Okay. Did we want to say on activities to be scheduled? I have a list of those here. That's talks about the various monitoring workshops and panels that we've talked about earlier. The possibility of an ecosystem workshop panel, but that's and water supply, I guess, but I guess those are well ahead of time. And I think we're also planning on field trips. What's the latest on those?
We're probably not going to be able to lock down on a field trip month until we get a better idea of when we want to lock the water supply reliability workshop. I know you guys have been talking about that workshop for a few years now. So I think we probably want to prioritize that. I think you, Jay, mentioned either September or November, which happened to be both the months we were kind of thinking about. So I think once we have that locked down, the field trip month will be the other month.
But when do we meet in September?
It'll be after the Bay Delta Conference.
Right, it's the 14th.
14th. And for November, let's do it November.
November, okay.
For the workshop.
Yeah, because I have to make a trip at the end of September.
If that's the case, the tour will likely not be the boat tour because I think September will probably still be a little too warm.
For November?
September.
September, okay.
Unless everyone's up for a boat tour around then, pending availability of tour guides.
And that would then be on the Monday before the Bay Delta Science Conference.
The Bay Delta Conference actually had changed their dates. I'm not sure if you saw that email that Terry Ann sent out a few weeks or months back. It actually starts on the Monday, I believe.
Oh, it starts on Monday and ends on
It's Monday to Wednesday, then Thursday and Friday will be
for us,
the ISB meeting.
Oh.
Okay. I may have seen it, but I didn't change it on my calendar. So.
Yeah, and I think we're planning to do that in Delta trip or in Delta meeting then too.
Okay, great, good to know.
Edmund, could you send out the latest version of what our schedules are like for the rest of the year? I've kind of lost track.
Okay, yeah, we'll have Terry Ann recirculate that spreadsheet.
Okay, anything else on those schedules? All right, I guess we're up to the review of the items for follow-up, both Darcy and Edmund.
Okay, so I have, starting out with the ISB will provide quarterly updates at the council meetings, so come back and see us often.
I didn't hear that, I don't think I heard that.
I think Jessica said that. For the water quality review, I have some kind of detailed things. Modify the statement about water quality data not being used in certain management decisions because they are, but not as much in restoration. And soften the language about more resources in recommendations 6 and 9, and I guess just don't identify particular entities, so soften that language. The work group would like comments back in about a week, and then we'll be working on making revisions. But now we have some additional graphics. So the word cloud, everybody said go ahead and use that for the cover. There will be possibly a conceptual model for nutrients. The Delta Donut is a potential one, and a map showing the stations for flow versus water quality stations. And so we may be having that discussion more likely in May, at the May meeting. Also identify what water quality part 2 will focus on up front in the report so that people don't have to dig for that. And then add a next steps section. Did I miss anything on that?
No, but we'd like you to sit in on our calls to make sure we do all those things.
For the reviews that we talked about, starting with the ecosystem amendment, the synthesis paper should be coming out around the end of March, and the council would prefer one review. So taking a look at those at the same time they go out for public, well, not necessarily public comment, but for the public to see, with the idea of having comments back mid to late May if possible. And if that's difficult, then there's this idea that we could have another ISB meeting or teleconference scheduled within that time frame. As soon as those synthesis papers are completed, you're going to start receiving them so that they're staggered a little bit. And let's see. And then I think I'll talk about the rest of that during the ecosystem review. ISB review. On the science plan, Liz and Tracy are doing a red flag review. They're expecting a public, well, there's the workshop in April, but the public review to happen in July. So depending on the number of comments that are received on that, the ISB may be seeing it in July, but also could be seeing it more October, September, October timeframe. But the goal is to have that to the council in time for their December meeting. For the water supply adaptive management framework, Jay and Joe will do a red flag review. There's going to be targeted review as well of that, and then full ISB review in May or June. So if you refer back to that that sheet that has all your timeframes, you will notice these are all on here. Accurately represented in time, and they are staggered. So ecosystem amendment March to May, water supply adaptive management framework May, June, and science plan either July, August, or September, October. John said he will send the New York Times article. He's also going to send the staff report on the renewal for the contract that funds the online journal, San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Science. So there was a request during the IEP workshop for a review of SFUS, the online journal. And this will be a follow-up discussion item, but John will start taking the lead, I think we decided it was you, on what kinds of questions and how to get at the idea of the value of the journal. But there was a consensus that, or at least a feeling, a sentiment that the ISB may not be the proper body to actually do that review, but maybe to help frame it and then look at the outcome of that review. I have that Tracy volunteered to do takeaways and impressions of the IEP workshop.
No. I asked whether or not we, as an ISB, would want to do something similar to what we do for the Bay Delta Science Conference.
I like that idea.
And nobody said yes.
Okay, so maybe not actually a follow-up item, but I like the idea.
Let's leave it this way. If I get comments from other people that were there as to what they thought within 2 weeks, I'll try and pull together. Okay. If I don't get any comments, then I'm not going to do it de novo. So.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, just getting back to the review of SFUs that I wrote down Joe's suggestion about community surveys in addition to the impact factor and information on submittals. For the IEP review, Vince would like for everybody to weigh in on the starting positions and provide comments in time before March 23rd when the questionnaires are due. For the monitoring enterprise review, we have the Chris Potter brown bag scheduled to inform that review, and then also a panel on remote sensing and invasives. And for that, the format will be similar to the other monitoring enterprise review panels. Later on in the year, we will be having a federal monitoring panel, and it'll be a different scope and format. And we're going to wait until after the consultant is in place to help inform post-consultant, help inform the ISB. Water supply reliability, Jay will revise the prospectus and send it to the work group to kick around prior to the full ISB discussing it. There may be a workshop. Now it sounds like it'll be November, similar to the one that was done for the levies review. For the ecosystem review, so the synthesis papers will be here very soon, so hopefully that will help inform where the direction that review will be going in. And then there was the possibility of looking for, not covering the same material, but looking for some areas for gaps in terms of the thinking for what to cover in that review. I have a note to make the fourth bullet ecosystem management, and just in general to be a little bit more forward thinking. And then send comments on that within a couple of weeks, within 2 weeks, and we'll have that as an item for discussion in April. So other things in April, we'll be using WebEx. We'll have Katerina, our new fellow, introduce herself, give a little brief bio. We'll be discussing the water quality review and the water supply reliability review. I think some of those items will still be on the May agenda. Water quality will probably be finalized by then. And then we'll have that brown bag and also a bunch of work that the ISB will be doing, not in a public forum, but monitoring enterprise review, the RFP, working on narrowing down who those contractors, the selected contractor will be, and then the IEP interviews. And then September, I just have the meeting will be after the Bay Delta Science Conference, and potentially an in-Delta meeting, and potentially a field tour depending on, well, we can't predict the weather, but there may be a field tour in September. So Edmund, did I miss anything?
I think you captured most of the main points, which we'll document, but other agenda items for April and May would be to review this or discuss the synthesis papers. Because you just want to do a formal review, so we'll probably need a topic on that.
On what? What was that?
The ecosystem amendment white papers.
Discuss the synthesis papers. Probably in May.
May.
Yeah, because I think April
them in
3rd, we're
April.
probably not going to have.
Would probably be good to probably assign an action to a few a follow-up item for a few members to work on an initial draft or something for discussion, and to help meet that deadline of having a review in mid-May, if feasible at all. But
Yeah, that would be good to get into the April agenda maybe, because we might have seen them enough to be able to have 3 work groups look at the 3 different
yeah, so probably be
papers.
like a plan
Yeah.
to accomplish the suggested deadline from the council.
It's a good idea, yeah.
One thing I had in my notes that we didn't talk about was that Yumi asked she would like to have a couple of ISB members, if possible, at their science plan public workshop on April 6th from 9 to 1. So we should, I'm willing, but it's a bit of a travel. Liz is also on the small group, but it's a long travel for her. So are other people interested or want to be there? And again, my sense of what she said was she wants people to, she would like to have some ISB members there to represent sort of the ISB's review and input into the, not input, but review of the Delta Science Plan revision. So, and we can decide that later too, but
I can be there. I've got it on the calendar.
okay.
I might have to be there late because I've got class from 9 to 10, but let me see if I can reschedule a couple of things.
So I have Dick and Jay. That's possible.
Possibly. I've got two other things scheduled that time, but I can see if I can move at least one.
All right, anything else? Any, I guess, public comments for things not on the agenda? All right, thank everyone for being so efficient and getting us done early, and our meeting's adjourned.